7 For love or money, valuing your life energy, work and income. In chapter 6 we talked about valuing your life energy by spending your money more consciously. In this chapter we will talk about valuing your life energy by looking at how well you spend your time. Are you getting full value for selling that most precious commodity, your life? Does work for you? Sometimes you have to question the obvious in order to get at the truth. The question we will be exploring in this chapter is, what is work? The obvious answer, of course, is that work is what we do to make a living. But that definition robs us of our life. Some of us honor our jobs and neglect the rest of our lives. Others of us endure our jobs and make up for it on the evenings and weekends. Some of us love our work, or did once and hope to again, but find our personal vision constrained by boards, supervisors, funders, or investors. In any of these cases, we end up with half a life. In any of these cases, we fail to value our life energy. And in any of these cases, we often feel helpless about making changes. What we will be exploring now is whether our definition of work itself is part of the problem. How well are you using your life energy both on and off the job? Is your job consuming, using up, destroying, wasting your life? Do you love your life, using each hour on and off the job with care? As we said in chapter 2, our life energy is precious because it is limited and irretrievable, and because our choices about how we use it express the meaning and purpose of our time here on earth. So far you have learned to value your life energy by aligning your spending with your fulfillment and your values. Now it's time to learn about valuing your life energy by maximizing your compensation in love or money for the hours you invest in your work. What is work? Just as with money, our concept of work consists of a patchwork of contradictory beliefs, thoughts, and feelings, notions we absorbed from our parents, our culture, the media, and our life experience. The following quotations highlight the incongruity of our different definitions of work. E.F. Schumacher says, "The three purposes of human work are as follows: first, to provide necessary and useful goods and services. Second, to enable every one of us to use and thereby perfect our gifts like good stewards. Third, to do so in service to, and in cooperation with, others, so as to liberate ourselves from our inborn egocentricity." Point 1. The late economist Robert Theobald tells us, work is defined as something that people do not want to do, and money as the reward that compensates for the unpleasantness of work. Point 2. Studs Terkel begins his book Working This Way. This book, being about work, is, by its very nature, about violence to the spirit as well as to the body. It is about ulcers as well as accidents, about shouting matches as well as fist fights, about nervous breakdowns as well as kicking the dog around. It is, above all, or beneath all, about daily humiliations. To survive the day is triumph enough for the walking wounded among the great many of us. It is about a search, too, for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor, in short, for a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying. Point 3. Khalil Gibran, on the other hand, tells us, work is love made visible. For what is work? Is it a blessing or a curse? A trial or a triumph? Is work good for the soul, or is it, as cartoonist Matt Groening suggests, life in hell? Our task will be to redefine work the same way we redefined money, by looking for what we can say about work that is consistently true. This definition will allow you to reperceive your work in ways that are more consistent with your values and your true fulfillment as well as your bottom line. Work through the ages. Let's begin by taking a brief look at the history of work, for it is through looking at history that we find new opportunities to shape our own personal stories. Where do our concepts about work come from? Why do we work? And what is the place of work in our lives? Minimum daily requirement of work. As human beings we all must do some work for basic survival, but how much? Is there a minimum daily requirement of work? A number of diverse sources, ranging from primitive cultures to modern history, would place this figure at about 3 hours a day during an adult lifetime. Marshall Solins, author of Stone Age Economics, discovered that before Western influence changed daily life, Kung men hunted from 2 to 2.5 days a week, with an average work week of 15 hours. Women gathered for about the same period of time each week. In fact, one day's work supplied a woman's family with vegetables for the next 3 days. Throughout the year both men and women worked for a couple of days, then took a couple off to rest and play games, gossip, plan rituals, and visit. It would appear that the work week in the old days beats today's bankers' hours by quite a bit. 5 Dr. Frithjof Bergman states, for most of human history, people only worked for 2 or 3 hours per day. As we moved from agriculture to industrialization, work hours increased, creating standards that label a person lazy if he or she doesn't work a 40-hour week. The very notion that everyone should have a job only began with the Industrial Revolution. 6 In his study of numerous utopian communities of the 19th century, John Humphrey Noyes, founder of the Oneida community, noted that, all these communities have demonstrated what the practical Dr. Franklin, of the 18th century, said, that if everyone worked bodily 3 hours daily, there would be no necessity of anyone's working more than 3 hours. 7 Moving on to the 20th century, in 1934, Paramahansa Yogananda, Indian sage and visionary, spoke of self-sufficient, spiritually oriented worldwide communities in which, everybody, rich or poor, must work 3 hours a day in order to produce only the extreme necessities of life. Work 3 hours a day and live in the luxury of literary wealth and have time to do what is meaningful to us. 8 These quotations all suggest that 3 hours a day is all that we must spend working for survival. One can imagine, in pre-industrial times, that this pattern would make sense. Life was more of a piece back then when work blended into family time, religious celebrations, and play. Then came the labor-saving Industrial Revolution and the compartmentalization of life into work and non-work, with work taking an ever bigger bite out of the average person's day. In the 19th century the common man, with justified aversion to such long hours on the job, began to fight for a shorter work week. Champions for the workers claimed that fewer hours on the job would decrease fatigue and increase productivity. Indeed, they said, fewer hours was the natural expression of the maturing Industrial Revolution. Fewer hours would free the workers to exercise their higher faculties, and democracy would enjoy the benefit of an educated and engaged citizenry. But all that came to a halt during the Depression. 9 The work week, having fallen dramatically from 60 hours at the turn of the century to 35 hours during the Depression, became locked in at 40 hours for many and has crept up to 50 or even 60 hours a week in recent years. Why? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of a paycheck? During the Depression, free time became equated with unemployment. In an effort to boost the economy and reduce unemployment, the New Deal established the 40-hour week and the government as the employer of last resort. Workers were educated to consider employment, not free time, to be their right as citizens, life, liberty, and the pursuit of the paycheck. Benjamin Klein Honeycutt, in Work Without End, illuminates the doctrine of full employment. Since the Depression, few Americans have thought of work reduction as a natural, continuous, and positive result of economic growth and increased productivity. Instead, additional leisure has been seen as a drain on the economy, a liability on wages, and the abandonment of economic progress. 10 The myths of growth is good and full employment established themselves as key values. These dovetailed nicely with the gospel of full consumption, which preached that leisure is a commodity to be consumed rather than free time to be enjoyed. For the last half-century full employment has meant more consumers with more disposable income. This means increased profits, which means business expansion, which means more jobs, which means more consumers with more disposable income. Consumption keeps the wheels of progress moving, as we saw in Chapter 1. So we see that our concept, as a society, of leisure has changed radically. From being considered a desirable and civilizing component of day-to-day life, it has become something to be feared, a reminder of unemployment during the years of the Depression. As the value of leisure has dropped, the value of work has risen. The push for full employment, along with the growth of advertising, has created a populace increasingly oriented toward work and toward earning more money in order to consume more resources. This is no more evident than in our relationship to our automobiles. Once vehicles of leisure, they are now office extensions. We wear our wireless headsets to maneuver traffic while we make deals on our cell phones. There are even devices that make the passenger seat into an office. A while ago, a friend who traveled a lot was asked where he lived. He said, Northwest Airlines. Maybe now he'd give his IP address. Or the make of his car. Or the freeway where he works during rush hour. To counter all this, a free time movement has sprung up in the early 21st century. A campaign called Take Back Your Time, initiated by John DeGraff, advocates for shorter work hours and longer vacations for overworked Americans. Even with all the studies saying that reduced hours and sufficient leisure actually increase worker productivity, time advocates are swimming upstream against a cultural assumption that the 8-hour workday is next to godliness. The emerging slow food movement also challenges our workaholic lifestyle. Instead of wolfing down fast food alone at your computer, this movement suggests that eating is far more than fueling the body for the next leg of the rat race, but rather a time of conviviality, pleasure, and conversation. In short, it's civilizing. Work takes on new meaning. In addition, according to Honeycutt, during the last half-century we've begun to lose the fabric of family, culture, and community that gave meaning to life outside the workplace. The traditional rituals, the socializing, and the simple pleasure of one another's company all provided structure for non-work time, affording people a sense of purpose and belonging. Without this experience of being part of a people and a place, leisure leads more often to loneliness and boredom. Because life outside the workplace has lost vitality and meaning, work has ceased being a means to an end and become an end in itself. Honeycutt notes, meaning, justification, purpose, and even salvation were now sought in work, without a necessary reference to any traditional philosophic or theological structure. Men and women were answering the old religious questions in new ways, and the answers were more and more in terms of work, career, occupation, and professions. 11 Arlie Hochschild, in her 2001 book The Time Bind, says that families now have 3 jobs: work, home, and repair of relationships damaged by ever more time at the office. Even corporations with family-friendly policies subtly reward people who spend more time at work, whether they are more productive or not. Also, offices are getting more comfortable while homes are more hectic, inducing a guilty desire to spend more time working because it's more restful. 12 The final piece of the puzzle snaps into place when we look at the shift in the religious attitude toward work that came with the rise of the Protestant ethic. Before that time, work was profane and religion was sacred. Afterward, work was seen as the arena where you worked out your salvation, and the evidence of a successful religious life was success in the world of business. So here we are in the 21st century. Our paid employment has taken on myriad roles. Our jobs now serve the function that traditionally belonged to religion. They are the place where we seek answers to the perennial questions: who am I, and why am I here, and what's it all for? Our jobs are also called upon to provide the exhilaration of romance and the depths of love. It's as though we believed that there is a job charming out there, like the Prince Charming in fairy tales, that will fill our needs and inspire us to greatness. We've come to believe that, through this job, we would somehow have it all: status, meaning, adventure, travel, luxury, respect, power, tough challenges, and fantastic rewards. All we need is to find Mr. or Ms. Right job. Perhaps what keeps some of us stuck in the home/freeway/office loop is this very job charming illusion. We're like the princess who keeps kissing toads, hoping one day to find herself hugging a handsome prince. Our jobs are our toads. Doobie doobie doo. We all remember the question we were asked, over and over, throughout childhood: what do you want to be when you grow up? Do you remember what you answered? Was it something that came from inside, or did you, with a child's intuition, say what the adults wanted to hear? Did your answer change over time? Was the hormone-ridden 18-year-old who selected your college major in his or her right mind? Are the dreams you had as a teenager tucked away with your high school yearbook? Did your job life take a left turn, bumping on byways you would never have chosen on career day in your high school? If you went on to be what you wanted to be when you grew up, has it met your expectations? The very question, what do you want to be when you grow up, is actually part of the problem. It asks what you want to be, yet you are supposed to answer it with what you want to do. Is it any wonder that so many of us suffer midlife crises as we face the fact that our doing doesn't even come close to expressing our being? We are so wedded to what we do to make a living that we perpetuate, without thinking, this confusion of doing with being. Indeed, in terms of sheer hours, we may be more wedded to our jobs than to our mates. The vows for better or worse, richer or poorer, in sickness and in health and often till death do us part may be better applied to our jobs than our wives or husbands. No wonder we introduce ourselves as nurses or contractors rather than as parents or friends. In Chapter 5 we saw that getting out of debt and accumulating savings would allow unemployment to become a golden opportunity for discovery, learning and renewal. But what if you think that who you are is what you do to make money? No amount of savings would keep you from that loss of purpose and self-esteem. As we'll see, who you are is far greater than what you do for money, and your true work is far greater than your paid employment. Our focus on money and materialism may have robbed us of the pride we can and should feel in who we are as people and the many ways we contribute to the well-being of others. Our task now is to retrieve that birthright of knowing ourselves as human beings rather than as human doings or human earnings. Did we win the Industrial Revolution? We've come a long way since the time when our ancestors worked 3 hours a day and enjoyed the pleasures of socializing, rituals, celebrations and games the rest of the time. Has it been worth it? We've certainly gained a tremendous amount by focusing our creativity and ingenuity on mastering the physical world. Science, technology, culture, art, language, and music have all evolved and brought us countless blessings. Few of us would want to turn back the clock entirely, forsaking Bach or penicillin. We do need to stop the clock, however, and evaluate our direction. Are we still on course? Let's look briefly at the modern workplace and job market. Where are we? And is it where we want to be? Some workers feel underemployed, their days filled with repetitive, menial, or unchallenging tasks that call forth very little of their creativity or intelligence. Others feel overworked, especially now with corporate downsizing shifting more and more responsibilities onto the shoulders of the lucky few who retain their jobs. The rising awareness of issues of social justice and ecology is tearing some workers in two. Economically they need their jobs, but ethically they don't support the products or services their companies provide. Retirement security is no longer secure. Major pension funds have gone bankrupt, many corporations are shifting saving for retirement back onto the shoulders of workers and some even wonder about the security of our national social security safety net. According to a recent Conference Board report, Americans are growing increasingly unhappy with their jobs. The decline in job satisfaction is widespread among workers of all ages and across all income brackets. 13 A poll conducted by the Center for a New American Dream found that more than half of Americans say they would be willing to give up a day's pay a week for an extra day of free time. 14 We've had enough, it would seem, of making a dime in such a crazy world. We spend the major portion of our waking hours at our jobs, and it hardly seems worth it. We look to work to meet many of our needs, and we end up unfulfilled. Why do we give the best years of our lives to our jobs? What is the purpose of work? Let's continue our exploration of work, this most personal and profound relationship, by reflecting on a few questions. Why do you do what you do to earn money? What motivates you to get out of bed 5 days a week to go somewhere and make money? What is the purpose, in your experience, of your paid employment? If you are supported by a working spouse or relative, you can reflect either on why that breadwinner works or on some work experience from your past. If you are retired or unemployed, think about a job you once had. Now consider the following list of various purposes of paid employment and see which ones apply to you. Earning money to provide necessities: food, clothing, shelter, survival, to provide amenities, comforts, to provide luxuries, to provide funds for others, philanthropy, to leave an estate, a sense of security that your needs will be met, that your value as an adult human being is recognized, tradition, to carry on a family tradition of following a particular profession, to maintain a sense of continuity and connection with your past, enjoyment, to be in contact with interesting people, to have stimulation, entertainment and fun, duty, to do your fair share in keeping society functioning smoothly, service, to make a contribution to others, society and the world, learning, to acquire new skills, prestige and status, to receive praise, admiration and respect from others, power over people who report to you and follow your commands over the course of events, influencing decisions, socializing, to enjoy opportunities to socialize with your co-workers, to meet the public and feel part of a larger community, personal growth, to be stimulated and challenged, to expand your emotional and intellectual life, success, to get a way to measure progress and success, to compare yourself with others in your field, creativity and fulfillment, to achieve fulfillment, that feeling of being completely and well used, to be challenged, to stay sharp, to create something new, time structuring, to structure your time and give an orderly rhythm to your life, just because that's what people do. Have you noticed that work has two different functions? The material, financial function, i.e., getting paid, and the personal function, emotional, intellectual, psychological, and even spiritual? The original question was, what is the purpose served by paid employment? In reality, there is only one purpose served by paid employment: getting paid. That is the only real link between work and money. The other purposes of paid employment are other types of rewards, certainly desirable, but not directly related to getting paid. They are all equally available in unpaid activities. For middle-class workers and up, any stress, confusion or disappointment we might feel concerning our paid employment is rarely because of the pay itself. We have already seen that beyond a certain level of comfort, more money does not bring more satisfaction. Perhaps the trouble with our paid employment, then, is that our needs for stimulation, recognition, growth, contribution, interaction, and meaning are not being met by our jobs. What if we removed most of these expectations from our paid employment and recognized that all purposes for work other than earning money could be fulfilled by unpaid activities? This observation brings us to a critical point in re-examining our relationship with work. There are two sides to work. On one side is our need and desire for money. We work in order to get paid. On the other side, and totally separate from our wages, is the fact that we work in order to fulfill many other purposes in our lives. It should be noted that this may be not true for the millions who do not earn enough even with two jobs to support themselves and their families. 15. A 2008 survey by Opinion Research Corporation poll found that 69% of Americans say they would support a paid vacation law, but when broken down by demographic, over 80% of lower-income people want more time. Redefining work. The real problem with work, then, is not that our expectations are too high. It's that we have confused work with paid employment. Redefining work as simply any productive or purposeful activity, with paid employment being just one activity among many, frees us from the false assumption that what we do to put food on the table and a roof over our heads should also provide us with our sense of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. Breaking the link between work and money allows us to reclaim balance and sanity. Our fulfillment as human beings lies not in our jobs but in the whole picture of our lives, in our inner sense of what life is about, our connectedness with others and our yearning for meaning and purpose. By separating work and wages we bring together the different parts of ourselves and remember that our real work is just to live our values as best we know how. In fact, mistaking work for wages has meant that most of our jobs have gotten neither the attention nor the credit they deserve. Jobs like loving our mates, being a decent neighbor, or developing a sustaining philosophy of life. When we are whole, we don't need to try to consume our way to happiness. Happiness is our birthright. You may love your paid employment or you may hate it, it doesn't matter. But you do want to recognize that the purpose of your paid employment is getting paid and that your real work may be far bigger than this one job. By separating work and wages, you can see more clearly whether you are valuing both on and off the job that precious commodity called life energy. Remember our discussion about life energy in Chapter 2? If you are 40 years old, actuarial tables indicate that, on average, you have just 349,763 hours of life left in your life energy bank account. These hours are all you've got. There is nothing in your life that is more valuable than your time, the moments you have left. You cannot put too much awareness and intention into the way you invest those moments. By separating work from wages, you can do a better job at all your jobs. When at your paid job, you can value your life energy by working efficiently, diligently, intelligently, and for the highest remuneration possible. When doing the rest of your work, you can value your life energy by working efficiently, diligently, intelligently, and with the greatest degree of enthusiasm and love you have in you. Breaking the link between work and wages has as much power in our lives as the recognition that money is simply something we trade our life energy for. Money is our life energy. It takes its value not from external definitions but from what we invest in it. Similarly, paid employment takes its only intrinsic value from the fact that we are paid to do it. Everything else we do is an expression of who we are, not what we must do out of economic necessity. By breaking the link, we regain quality, values, and self-worth as our bottom line. By breaking the link, we can redefine work simply as whatever we do in alignment with our purpose in life. By breaking the link, we get our life back. The stunning implications of redefining work from this point of view. It's clear why your paid employment may feel like making a dying. Besides earning money, you may be doing nothing else on the job that is in alignment with your purpose. 8 to 10 hours a day. 5 days a week. 50 weeks a year. 40 or more years of your life. This opens up a host of questions. How much money do you need to be at the peak of fulfillment? Is your job providing that amount? Are you working for less than your worth and bringing home less money than you need? Or are you earning far more than you need for fulfillment? What is the purpose of that extra money? If it serves no purpose, would you want to work less and have more time to do what matters to you? If it does serve a purpose, is that purpose so clear and so connected with your values that it brings an experience of joy to your hours at your paid employment? If not, what needs to change? Let's explore together some of the implications of disconnecting work from wages, of seeing paid employment as distinct from work in the sense of fulfillment of purpose, in life. 1. Redefining work increases choices. Let's say you are a natural-born teacher but you took a job as a computer programmer because you can make more money, which you are convinced you need. In the old way of thinking, every time someone asked you what you do, you would be forced to affirm, "I am a computer programmer." What do you suppose the effect on you might be of this long-term incongruity between your inner sense of yourself and your outer presentation? You might be just mildly unhappy and not know why. You might get ill, as one friend of ours did when she gave up her dream of being a concert pianist and became a programmer instead. She developed an inexplicable illness that put her on disability for nearly a year. You might run up a credit card debt to reward yourself for doing something that doesn't suit you. The one thing you might overlook, though, is questioning whether or not you are a computer programmer just because that's what you do to make a living. When you break the link between wages and work, however, another option opens up. When you're asked what you do, you can affirm, "I am a teacher but currently I'm writing computer programs to make money." Being able to acknowledge who you really are allows you to reevaluate how you've structured your career. You might decide to save money and go back to school for your teaching credentials. You might decide to reduce your programming hours so that you can volunteer as a teacher. You might decide to teach computer programming. You might bring in a third love, like kayaking, and teach that on weekends while you program computers for money. Disconnecting work from wages allows the various parts of your compartmentalized life to break loose, slide around and rearrange themselves in a pattern that serves you better. Chris N worked her way up the ladder of success but found the grind did not suit her sensibilities. As a doctor, she found herself trying to promote health in an unhealthy system, a system that demanded 100-hour work weeks, not enough sleep and precious little time for anything else. During her residency and early years as a physician, the work was so all-consuming that she had no time to think about money, and no time to consider how she was spending it. Marrying another doctor only doubled the pattern of unconsciousness. Chris and her husband accumulated houses and cars and exotic investments. With lucrative practices, they didn't find it hard to adhere to their one accounting rule: spend less than you earn. The thought of keeping track of their spending was beyond comprehension. They couldn't worry about where their money went. They confused consciousness with worry, and they had enough to worry about in practicing medicine. But Chris's days as a superdoc were numbered. She gave birth to 2 children. Being a mother opened her heart and tempered her drive, and she began to question the ethics and economics of the standard practice of medicine. She wanted out of the medical business and back into her original vision of medical service, where she would have time to listen and administer care to her patients and also time to enjoy her family. With a mixture of trepidation and resolve, she left her secure medical group with all its benefits and opened a clinic, staffed by women, for women, that would reflect her values. During this time, Chris began to recognize in herself and in her patients deep patterns of financial passivity and dependence. Some had grown up deprived, never having their needs honored and met. Others had been given things in place of love. Many were abdicating their own power and financial responsibility in their marriages. While it seemed natural, or at least understandable, that older women might suffer from this unnatural ineptitude, even younger career women, even Chris, showed signs of an unhealthy financial subservience. Being honest and courageous, Chris searched her own soul as she prescribed self-reflection for her patients. What were her assumptions and blind spots with regard to money? About this time she listened to the FI audio course. In her enthusiasm, she immediately went to her husband and asked him the question she was beginning to ask herself: what would you do if you didn't have to work for money? What do you mean? He replied. I love my work. But what if you never had to charge anyone to meet your overhead? Unable to answer that question, he promptly went to sleep. Eventually he listened to the course, but his zeal for a new way of practicing medicine did not match Chris's. She began to work on the steps of the program but still felt out of step with her husband. How could she proceed if he wasn't with her? She finally came to the conclusion that even in a conventional marriage, or perhaps especially in a conventional marriage, a woman has to be willing to live a life of her own. Marriage doesn't eliminate the spiritual necessity of becoming a whole and autonomous person. Indeed, for a marriage to work, the partners are required to individuate. In the end, she brought all the steps up to date herself. As her personal insight grew, she began to re-evaluate her clinic. This was a step in the right direction, but only served to show her how much further she had to go. For example, as the clinic staff's ideals met the financial realities, everyone, from the receptionist to Chris, had to look deeply into her financial belief systems. None of the staff wanted to work the long and arduous hours maintained by mainstream medical professionals, but they all had trouble adjusting to earning less money. The economics were all wrong. As Chris turned toward non-invasive procedures, her income per patient went down. Expensive procedures are what pay the bills for most physicians. Chris preferred prevention, which meant teaching women how to be responsible for their health. She saw a way to practice medicine so that it would heal both body and soul, yet the economics of medicine kept pulling her back into the old way of working. Either I have to do medicine differently or not do it at all. For Chris, financial independence is the whole process of recovery from old ways of thinking about money, work, meaning and purpose. If a healthy practice of medicine means less money, so be it. In fact, FI is every bit as much a recovery process as recovery from alcohol or drug addiction. It is a process of healing the many ways we've given our power over to people and circumstances outside ourselves, trying to gain a sense of worth from social symbols of success while denying our inner reality. As Chris has changed, She has not gotten out of step with her profession. She's discovered a more holistic way to practice medicine and live life. Chris is not alone. A survey done by the Nationwide Center for a New American Dream found that nearly half of Americans had made voluntary changes in their lives that resulted in making less money. Those who did so reported being happy with the changes and said that the major motivations for making less money were reducing stress, striking a balance in their lives, and having more free time. 2. Redefining work allows you to work from the inside out. For many of us, much of life is lived from the outside in, selecting our roles and personas like dishes at a Chinese restaurant. One person might select fireman from the job column, blonde hair and blue eyes from the wife column, 2 from the children column, casual from the style column, Toyota from the car column, Democrat from the political column, and condo from the housing column, and figure he's got life pretty well squared away. Fitting our well-rounded selves into the square hole called job reinforces this impression that life consists of selecting options from a fixed list. Unless you're an artist or an entrepreneur, most often your job consists of working with someone else's agenda for which service you get paid. There's a kind of subtle yet pervasive irresponsibility in the work world, a sense that we are always doing someone else's bidding, angling to please someone else up the line a bit. In large corporations, most workers don't even have a clue as to who originated the plan they're diligently getting to work. And such corporations buy not only our work but our personalities as well, with their unspoken cultural norms about who talks with whom, what to wear, where people at various levels do lunch, how much overtime you have to put in to be visible, and hundreds of other daily choices. It's clear that if we think that what we do to make money is who we are, we will end up adopting whatever pattern will allow us to survive best at our job. If you are a computer programmer, for example, you have probably absorbed a host of attitudes and beliefs about yourself along with the skills you acquired to do the work. But if who you are and what you do to make money are distinct, as they can be when you disconnect work from wages, you can reclaim your lost self. As you come to know yourself, your values, your beliefs, your real talents and what you care about, you will be able to work from the inside out. You will be able to do your job without giving up yourself. You will be responsible and accountable, both on and off the job. You will put a priority on being able to live with yourself, and if your job won't let you do that, you might choose to change jobs. Margaret P. is in the process of shifting from living according to others' values, living from the outside in, to discovering and living her values, living from the inside out. She'd already been married, had 2 children and gotten a divorce. As a single parent with a strong sense of duty, she wanted to earn as much as possible to support her family. That ruled out teaching, which is what she'd been trained to do. At the time she was undergoing this career change, an obvious place to look for ample income was in financial services, and the quickest route in was to become a certified financial planner. So that's what Margaret did. After several years she began to feel conflict. She and her clients believed she was there to guide and protect them in the confusing world of investments. In reality, she was a salesperson working on commission, and some products were more lucrative than others. She began having stomach pains and realized she had to stop selling financial products at all costs. She stopped pursuing sales and, while her body got better, her personal financial picture got worse. She was glad that she and IVU had started the Financial Independence Support Group of 20 people committed to working with the FI program. Their monthly meetings were islands of support and sanity where the cacophony of the consumer culture faded out and they could once again hear themselves think. As they followed the steps of the program, they found themselves ever more willing to follow the promptings of their hearts, and for each one of them, that looked slightly different. For example, one bright, incisive woman realized she was grossly underemployed in her civil service job. Through honoring her life energy, she saw that she was wasting her talent in a bog of mediocrity. They aren't paying me enough to stay here in this amount of pain. So she quit and began living on savings and doing research on where and how to re-enter the job market. Another couple left the security of an institutional job to set up their own private practice without going into debt to do it. All of these changes came out of the process of doing the steps of this program. Had the people in the group not gone through the requisite tracking, record-keeping and self-examination, these changes might have filled them with dread rather than hope. Had they not found dozens of their own unique ways to reduce expenses, many wouldn't have been able to afford to take a second look. In their monthly meetings they did exercises from the study guides, see resources, so that they could reflect together on their money myths and misconceptions. Some discovered that they had no real purpose for their lives beyond their jobs and began a second monthly meeting to explore purpose. Quite a few had to find ways to make these changes in spite of costly teenagers and unsympathetic mates. It was out of doing all these steps that the work equals wages formula split apart and they were able to discover new ways to organize their lives to match their true values and purpose. 3. Redefining work makes life whole again. For the sake of order and convenience, we've sorted our lives into boxes. There's our work life, our home life, our community life, our inner life and our secret life. Such systems management allows us to track and balance our many responsibilities. But our prioritized to-do lists are not our lives. In theory they are there to assist us in navigating life, but more often they run us. Rather than perceiving life as a continuing flow of experience in the present moment, we become convinced that we have life captured in a 3-ring binder with colored dividers. If we just follow the signs and connect the dots, the picture of a perfect life will pop out at us. And the biggest, most compelling signs we follow are the ones that pertain to our paid employment. If you look at work separately from wages, however, you have the opportunity to discover that you are simply performing activities, of one kind or another, from morning till night. Try an experiment for the next 3 days. Whenever you remember, ask yourself, where am I? The most accurate answer will always be, here. Then ask yourself, what am I actually doing? No, don't just say working for those 8 hours on your job. More likely you're writing or thinking or cleaning or driving or speaking or walking or standing or lifting or sitting or listening or deciding or looking for something or the same kinds of things you do the rest of the day. All day, every day, you're just living your life. This may make your job seem more mundane, but it will also make the rest of your life seem more vivid and whole and make you feel more alive. Try it. 4. Redefining work adds life to your retirement. Everyone retires someday. The only question is when. Many work themselves into an early grave and retire the day they die. Others play by the rules and retire when their company says they can or must. In the United States, with the savings rate so low, the economy shifting and the age going up when Social Security payments cut in, the whole idea of our golden years of leisure seems to be one more happily ever after mirage. And yet there are those who have followed this program, or a similar plan, and retired while they still had plenty of life left in them. Whenever you retire, the quality of your retirement will be enhanced if you've been able to disconnect your work from your wages. By disconnecting work from wages, you will ensure that your retirement is simply retirement from paid employment, not from life. You can continue to expand your real work after retirement, whether you retire at 40, 60, or 80. If you are actively engaged in a life that is meaningful to you, no one can declare that you are no longer a valuable worker. You may end your tenure at your paid employment, but you won't lose your usefulness or your dignity. Think about your own associations with the word retirement. If the word has any negative overtones for you, see whether redefining retirement in the way we've suggested alters those feelings. Retirement symbolizes the end of life only if you take your self-definition from your paid employment. What new name can we find for this delicious freedom coupled with the energy to use it for delicious ends that you define? 5. Redefining work honors unpaid activity. If you think you are working only when you are earning money, then you, and billions of other people, are very busy being unemployed a lot of the time. The everyday activities of taking care of yourself, your home and your family are all unpaid work. It's not that we don't notice these other life chores, it's that we don't always honor them. In our minds we tend to regard them as mere obstacles to surmount on the way to our real work, the jobs we get paid for. What about the hours you spend being a father or mother to your children, a good neighbor, a caring friend, a loving mate and a good citizen of your city, state, country, and planet? Those activities alone could fill a life with meaning, challenge, creativity, and purpose. Yet, being busy with our paid work, we often try to do our relationship work by some imagined rule book. The busy parent provides food, clothing, shelter, assorted lessons, chauffeur service and, whenever possible, quality time. The well-meaning but harried mate shares a bed, a house, the chores, breakfast, dinner, if no business meetings are scheduled for those times, finances and, whenever possible, quality time. As a citizen, you vote. As a neighbor, you dig up your dandelions, chat over the fence or in the elevator and join the block watch. As a friend, you do lunch or talk on the phone. In our hearts we know we could do better, but life is so busy there's no time to just be with people. Another casualty of our confusion of work with wages is our inner work, the job of self-examination, self-development, and emotional and spiritual maturation. It takes time to know yourself. Time for reflection, for silence, for journal writing, for prayer and ritual, for dialogue with a caring friend to heal the wounds from our past, for developing a coherent philosophy of life and personal code of ethics, and for setting personal goals and evaluating progress. Yet, instead of honoring this as important work, we squeeze what we can into evenings and weekends, devoting the majority of our waking hours to the real work of our jobs. Redefining work gives us back the full experience and expression of these other activities. We can honor our household duties, our relationships, and our inner work and give this unpaid employment the same creativity, respect and attention that we give to our paid employment. 6. Redefining work reunites work and play. Since we have unconsciously equated income, getting paid, and work, we figure that if we are not collecting income we must not be working, we must be merely playing, a frivolous pastime that serves no real purpose. Sometimes play may look like work, as in an intense chess game. Sometimes work can look like and even be called play, as in professional sports. And sometimes work feels so much like play that people say, somewhat guiltily, "This job is such fun, I shouldn't be paid for it." So how do we tell the difference between work and play? Let's test some common parameters to see which ones give us an unfailing method for distinguishing work from play. Bring to mind a person doing an activity that he or she does very well and that is considered valuable by others, anything from figure skating to driving a bus on a winding mountain road to arguing a critical case in a federal court. What factor would tell you for certain that what you are observing is work? Eureka! We've found the difference. If there's money involved, it's clearly work. If there isn't money involved, it's either play, which we equate with fun, or duty, necessary but not necessarily nice. You do it either because you want to or because you have to, but not to earn money. Isn't it true that unpaid activity, whether it's play or duty, is often seen as worthless, as in worth less than paid activity? Isn't it true that there is an almost universal belief in our culture that if you are not working for money, not building a career, not employed, you are a nobody? 7. Redefining work allows you to enjoy your leisure more. In Downshifting, Amy Saltzman explores the theme of reinventing success on a slower track. As a professional herself, she became curious about why her generation, for all its striving, never seemed to arrive at happiness. Her book begins and ends with a meditation on empty front porches that in bygone eras were a hub of activity and pleasure. She aims her book at those of us who have dutifully played the part of career professional to the exclusion, in some cases, of almost everything else that gives life purpose and meaning. 16. She tells the stories of professionals who changed lanes in order to enjoy a slower, more fulfilling life. What all of them reclaimed was the value of their leisure time, the front porches of their lives. For the Greeks, leisure was the highest good, the essence of freedom, a time for self-development and for higher pursuits. Yet here we are in the early 21st century, unable to really relax and enjoy our leisure. Even our language betrays us by calling it time off, as though leisure were just a few minutes of recuperation before we're back on, a once again productive, i.e., real, human being. If we did not identify so strongly with what we do for money, we might honor and enjoy our leisure more. It's okay to play. It's okay to relax in the shade and listen to the birds. It's okay to take a walk to nowhere in particular. Leisure is not an identity crisis if you know you are not your job. The challenge, of course, is being able to deem your apparent idleness worthwhile. As Saltzman points out, work for many of us is an easy and acceptable way to fill the hours. In our professional lives we have clear rules to follow and goals to meet. By contrast, it is completely up to us to invent the success framework for our leisure. 17.8. Redefining work sheds a new light on right livelihood. Right livelihood is the ideal of finding a way for your true work or vocation to be your paid work as well. While that might seem to be what we're advocating here, there are a few pitfalls to this noble effort that the FI program neatly sidesteps. The first pitfall is that there is no guarantee that you will find someone to pay you to do what you feel called to do. It may take many years to develop your art or your research or your social innovation or your new technology to the point where those who have money want to pay for it. Most often this has less to do with the real value of your work than it has to do with luck, chance, perseverance, connections, or a host of other factors. By giving up the expectation that you will be paid to do the work you are passionate about, you can do both things with more integrity. You can make money to cover your expenses, and you can follow your heart without compromise. Michael Phillips, in his book The 7 Laws of Money, warns of the traps and fallacies hidden in the high ideal of right livelihood. He strongly recommends that people separate their service projects from their survival needs. Unfortunately, many people can't separate the two, and the net result is that their belief that the project they are working on is the most important thing they can do gets coupled with their conviction that they have to survive. The combination of these two ideas leads them to believe that the world owes them a living. 18 Other factors to consider about right livelihood. 1. Is a salary possible or even appropriate for the work we feel called to do? Our informal conflict resolution work in our church, our front porch ministry to the neighborhood kids with nowhere to go, telephone campaigns to promote peace, being a loving friend to someone who is dying? At the Crossroads, a document by the Communications Era Task Force about our era, calls these committed activities done out of a sense of personal commitment and commitment to society. Committed activities are vital to the health of a society. Yet we systematically undervalue and undersupport them because they don't fit into either our market economy or the public sector. They are not supported by the market because benefits from these activities are often long-term, diffuse, and difficult to define. They are not supported by government because they are not easily regulated by the bureaucracy. 19 Steve B., our truck driver from Maine, had half a dozen good ways to make money. He's a registered nurse, a landscaper, a massage therapist and a farmer. Right livelihood for him looked like nursing, performing a real service for people and paying the bills to boot. But it didn't work that way. As a nurse he was caught in a constant flow of charting and report writing, spending more time with a pencil than with the patients. And at the end of the day he had no energy for the volunteer work he loved. If he was going to be a nurse he wanted to do it for love, not money. So he settled on driving the propane truck. He has 1,000 clients and a route that covers many miles of back roads leading to isolated farms and homesteads. In the winter he may be the only person many of these people see all week. Some are old and ill, so he stops for a chat and to see how they are doing. He might listen to their complaints and help them sort out which to worry about and which to ignore. He does a lot of education about nutrition, especially for people who have no idea what their doctors mean by a low-fat, high-fiber diet. Somehow, without his taking a temperature or even writing a report, they feel better when he leaves. He's a healer without pay and it suits him fine. He earns his money delivering propane and gives his love for free. 2. If you are being paid for the work you feel called to do, look carefully at how you are spending your time in that right livelihood, income-producing work. Are you indeed doing the work fully and well, or are you spending an undue amount of time on financial concerns, perhaps raising money to continue your work? Many would-be saints end up as fundraisers, and many would-be activists end up as webmasters and soundbite writers, putting out newsletters and mass emails for the membership to keep the flow of donations coming in. Any activity that is either publicly or privately funded is subject to someone else's whims and priorities. Any product or service that depends on a fickle consuming public might not survive in a competitive marketplace. So ask yourself, is your work secure, or are there future worries about money that may rightly concern you now? 3. Would you do this work the way you are doing it if your financial needs were handled? If not, what adjustments are you making because you need the income? Are you able to stay true to your own integrity? As long as you are receiving money for the work you do, there is the possibility, however minute and subtle, of selling out your vision, your values, or your beliefs. In The Biology of Art, zoologist Desmond Morris tells of an experiment in introducing the profit motive to apes. The first step was teaching them to be artists and to produce drawings and paintings that were decidedly lovely. Once their art was established, he began to pay them, rewarding them with peanuts for their work. Under the reward system, their artwork quickly deteriorated, and they began turning out hasty scrawls just to get the peanuts. Commercialism destroyed the apes as artists and got them scrambling for a peanut instead. 20. This is where the need for honesty comes in. What adjustments, however subtle, are you making in your art, be it carpentry or archaeology or daycare or anything else, to keep that flow of peanuts coming in? How much are you willing to risk in your Sunday sermons before you start thinking about the possibility of losing your job, income, and parsonage, as well as your position and power in the community? Is your teaching what it would be if you weren't doing it as paid employment? Are you writing advertising copy instead of that great American novel you've been dreaming about for years? Have you sacrificed your vision of how life could be for the reality of making it dying? Redefining work allows you to step back and see your dreams for what they are, and your job for what it is, and to make both work for you. The power of redefining work by breaking the link between work and wages has stunning implications and benefits. As the late futurist and social scientist, Willis Harman put it, unbounded opportunities become apparent once the mind is freed by separating the functions of creative work and income distribution. 21. When you break the conceptual link between work and money, you give yourself the opportunity to discover what your true work is. It may turn out to be totally unrelated to what you are currently doing for money. Whether you love your job and remain in it or move on to something new, breaking the link between work and money opens up room in your life for those parts of yourself that have been crowded out by your job. You may experience a moment of panic at the emptiness left by even this temporary suspension of your identity as your job. But there are other yous, you as full-time parent, as learner, as friend, as adventurer, as community organizer, as volunteer, as artist, as dreamer, and as architect of your own life's work. A friend recently asked a colleague why he didn't seem to suffer from the stress everyone else at their overtaxed agency complained about. The colleague simply said, "My job is not the main event of my life." Breaking the link between work and money gives you back your life. You no longer need the stamp of approval called a job to give you all the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual benefits of being employed. You may even find out that it is not necessary to tie yourself to a 9-to-5 grind for the rest of your life just to support yourself. Now that we've established that the only intrinsic purpose of paid employment is getting paid, whether you love or hate your job, it makes sense to see whether you are trading your precious life energy for what it's worth. Now that you know that your life is bigger than your job, it makes sense to get a job that really does the job, i.e., pays you well. Now that you can see other options besides the 9-to-5 till you're 65, making a dying money go round, it makes sense to be sure that your paid employment pays you enough to make your investment of time worth it. This leads to Step 7 of the FI program. Step 7, Valuing your life energy, maximizing income. Step 7 is about increasing your income by valuing the life energy you invest in your job and exchanging it for the highest pay consistent with your health and integrity. When you pick up your paycheck, are you really getting a fair exchange for your investment of valuable life energy? The key to freedom from the making a dying world is valuing your life energy. We have seen that money is just something you trade your life energy for. We have also recognized that the purpose of paid employment is getting paid. Don't reason and self-respect both suggest, then, that when you are working for pay, one option is to make the most money per hour possible, consistent with your integrity and your health. While that may sound like good old-fashioned greed, follow along and you'll find yourself headed in another direction altogether. Through following steps 1 through 6 you have defined what is enough for you. Instead of defining enough as more than I have now, thus condemning yourself to the experience of perpetual poverty, you are discovering that enough is far less than you imagined and well within your means. And remember, your enough will be a level of spending that evolves out of aligning your spending with your experience of fulfillment and with your life purpose and values. Enough is not the minimum amount for survival, it is the exact amount that gives you fulfillment without excess. As we pointed out in Chapter 5, this enough often falls far below your income. If you are spending less money than you earn, that means you can spend less time on the job and still have enough. It's basic. If enough is $2,000 a month and you earn $20 an hour, you must work 100 hours a month to meet your expenses. But if you earn $40 an hour, you must work only 50 hours a month at your paid employment. Now we're moving back toward the lifestyle human beings enjoyed before the Industrial Revolution. You could work 2 or 3 hours a day for money and spend the rest of the time doing what you want to do for relaxation, fun, self-development, human interaction, community involvement, or world service. If you chose to work more hours at your paid employment, you would do it only for good reason, since you place a high value on your life energy. You might be doing it to support someone or something else. You might be doing it to get out of debt and experience that particular aspect of financial freedom. You might be doing it to develop savings so that you can be secure no matter what the economic climate. Or you might be doing it so that you can achieve some other life goals, like going back to school or traveling around the world or even becoming financially independent. The size and intensity of your goals will determine the time and vigor you invest in the workplace. You might even be so eager to reach a financial goal that you end up working a second job joyfully. Unlike the behavior of a workaholic, however, working extra hours is now connected with and serves your purpose. Disconnecting work from wages for Rosemary meant that she could move toward pursuing other goals beyond her job goals that ranged from travel to writing to working on projects that might help the planet. While she enjoyed her job as an activities director at a retirement home, she didn't plan to devote her whole life to it. She saw clearly that the more she earned now, the sooner she could get on with her other goals. When she received a $15,000 inheritance from her grandmother, she immediately added that money to her fine nest egg. Rather than searching for a higher paying job with the possibility of more stress, she decided on another strategy. She got a second job working on call with a small audio duplication and distribution company, putting in several hours a week on evenings and weekends. The schedule was flexible, the people congenial, the stress minimal, and her hourly pay was just as good as what she was getting at her full-time job. Even though she's working far more than 40 hours a week, her goal keeps her energy up and her spirits high. Valuing your life energy and seeking the highest pay possible has nothing to do with the more is better mentality. You don't want more money so that you can have more material possessions. You want more money so that you can have enough material possessions and more life. If money equals life energy, then by increasing your income you increase the amount of life available to you. Depending on your actual hourly wage, a new car could cost a month, 6 months, or a year of work. And you don't want more money so that you can have more status, prestige, power, or security. You know that money doesn't buy those things. You want more money so that you can have more freedom to be yourself without worrying about the money. Likewise, you don't want more money to boost your self-esteem. You want more money as an expression of your self-esteem, of valuing your life energy. New options for paid employment. You have several creative options to explore at this point, including increasing your pay so you can work part-time, enhancing your current job or changing jobs altogether. Higher pay, a matter of attitude. Many people are passive, even fatalistic, about the size of their earnings. They act out of a victim mentality, totally at the mercy of outside forces: the boss, the wage scale, the unemployment situation, the recession, the poor local economy, the president's economic policy, competition from low-paid workers in developing countries, and on and on. The attitude is one of "I can't find a good job and it's because of them. They are keeping me in a low-paying job." While economic realities may at times be harsh, it is also the nature of the human mind to make real the thoughts and beliefs that we hold, a fact that should encourage great care in how we think about ourselves. If you see yourself as a victim, you may well be too busy feeling sorry for yourself to notice the many opportunities to change your dismal destiny. Think how valuing your life energy might transform your experience and performance on the job, as well as your ability to get another job should you want one. With such an attitude, every moment you spend at your paid employment is connected to your internally generated personal goals, purpose, vision, and values. Wherever you are working for yourself. You experience yourself as valuable, as responsible for the way you distribute your life energy, as someone freely choosing to give your life energy to this particular job. One important factor limiting your earning potential is attitude, attitudes about yourself, example "I'm not good enough," attitudes about your job or employer, example "they're out to get me," and attitudes about current circumstances, example "there just aren't any jobs." These attitudes are demeaning, debilitating, and self-fulfilling. They are reflected in the quantity and quality of your work, in your interactions with employers and fellow employees, and in your fearfulness about your job security. To be successful, cultivate positive attitudes of self-respect, pride in your contribution to your workplace, dedication to your job, cooperation with your employers and co-workers, desire to do the job right, personal integrity, responsibility and accountability, and do it just because you value your life energy. You value your life energy because you value life. You are committed to excellence at your job because you're committed to 100% integrity, no matter what you're doing. You'd be surprised at the degree to which job satisfaction lies in the worker, not in the work. And it just so happens that this integrity and the increased quality and productivity of your work will easily qualify you for a pay raise. You may not even need to ask for it. Steve W., the carpenter we met in Chapter 6, found that one of the gifts of the FI program was the chance to reconnect with his aspirations as a writer. He'd grown up in an Air Force family and had kept moving as an adult. He finished high school in Gulfport, Mississippi, and then moved to Austin, Texas, where he employed 8 people in a remodeling business until the oil crash ripped the rug and floor out from under him. That and a divorce pared his possessions down to a van load, making step 1 very easy, and he took off, eventually landing in Oregon. Within a year of putting the FI program into practice, Steve had enough money saved to support himself for a year, allowing him to back away from the financial edge. He decided to try writing some stories that had been with him for years, stories based on his experiences in Mississippi in the early 1970s when he built a Baptist church with some old African American carpenters. To free up more time for writing, Steve started bidding his remodeling jobs a lot higher, assuming that most of those contracts wouldn't come through. What happened was a big surprise. Many people had been so impressed with his work in the past that they were willing to pay whatever he asked. He had all the work he wanted, at much higher wages. Wanting to deliver the quality they were paying for, he put even greater care into his carpentry. His reputation for superior craftsmanship spread, bringing in more work. His hours of paid employment went down, his income went up, his anxiety went down, his peace of mind went up, and his time to write seemed boundless. He was surprised, but he wasn't going to question his good fortune, or was it his good self-esteem? Financial independence as a part-time job. Steve W. chose what we usually refer to as part-time work. However, this new way of thinking about money and work puts that term in a new light. In the world of job equals identity, Part-time work makes you only a part-time person who has only part-time worth. As a part-timer, this thinking concludes, you would be sacrificing many of the benefits of full-time employment. You'd lose out on health insurance and whatever pension plan your company provides. You'd lose out on opportunities for advancement. You'd probably lose out on the best assignments, working instead on what's left over after the full-timers have schemed the cream off the top. In the new way of thinking, however, you are working part-time on someone else's agenda for money so you can work as much time as possible on your own agenda. You give your employers their money's worth, but you don't define your self-worth by what you do during that small fraction of your time. People have adopted a number of variations on this theme of part-time work. Some work 3 days a week, making every weekend a long one. Some work 6 months a year for money and do what they please with the other 6 months. You might be surprised at how many artists, writers, activists, and adventurers you find among seasonal workers. Some work 4 hours a day so that they can be available for their children both before and after school. Consider for a moment the impact of an increasing number of people's choosing to work part-time. 2 people could share one job, cutting down on the competition for increasingly scarce jobs. Pressure to deal with the problem of unemployment would be taken off the government. Job sharing is, indeed, becoming a respected and encouraged option. With FI thinking leading to reduced expenses, one job could provide a livable wage for 2 people. In addition, each person might do a better job because he or she wouldn't be suffering from the burnout, boredom, and thank God it's Friday syndrome so common among full-time workers. But what if I like my job? If you like your job, this new perspective, valuing your life energy, will only enhance your experience and your earnings. Lou B., who is partners with Steve B., the propane truck driver, loves her work as an accountant. She works with a vision and a mission. Calling herself a holistic accountant, she is dedicated to empowering people to become responsible with their money. Upon doing the FI course, she discovered the blind spots in her own personal finances. When she calculated her real hourly wage, she found that out of her $90 per hour fee, she netted $7.50. Her husband did better delivering propane during the winter in rural Maine. Where was all that money going? Lou discovered that she had been running her practice for her clients and her employees. Very noble, but not good business. Because she had wanted to provide service for people who couldn't afford it, she kept her rates low and was always the one to work overtime and go the extra mile. Doing the monthly tabulations showed her that she wasn't making any headway economically. She had forgotten the simple lesson of valuing her own life energy. She decided to raise her rates by 23% and to limit her staff to 1 secretary. In addition, she decided to limit both the number of clients, concentrating on those who wanted to learn to help themselves, and the number of hours she worked. After making these changes, she found herself with exactly the number and type of clients she wanted, and she now works fewer hours while earning more money. Because Lou values herself and her life energy, her clients value her advice and they learn from her to value themselves. How to get a high-paying, high-integrity job? This chapter isn't designed to be a job hunting manual. As we have seen, there is no job charming. The people we've met in these pages have had to do a lot of soul-searching, risk-taking, experimenting and challenging of old beliefs in order to move forward into jobs with higher pay and high integrity. They've had to see that their lives are bigger than their jobs. The parts of themselves that had been suffocated by their paid employment had to be given room to breathe again. Visions from childhood of how life could be had to be excavated from under the status, seriousness, and self-importance that masquerade as adulthood. They had to tell themselves the truth about whether or not their current paid employment was really doing what paid employment is supposed to do, earn money. There are a number of excellent job hunting guides on the market and more coming out every day as jobs become a scarcer and more cherished commodity. The classic is the frequently updated "What color is your parachute?" by Richard Balls. 22 Beyond that, you're on your own. Just one word of caution. As P.T. Barnum once said, there's a sucker born every minute. There are a host of workshop leaders, agents, headhunters, advisors, counselors, and the like who would be happy to help you find job charming for a hefty fee. Some of these services are useful, but be discerning. Read the fine print on contracts. Be as sharp a shopper as you would be for a car or a refrigerator. What follows is an attitudinal checklist that might be just as helpful to you as a highly paid employment specialist. Job hunting checklist 1. Purpose. In order to find a high integrity, high paying job, you must have a clear purpose for having one. Since the utilitarian purpose of paid employment is getting paid, high pay will certainly be part of your purpose. Another goal could be, in part, simply the goal of leaving work you don't enjoy. But you must also clarify the meanings and motivations that are part of your larger purpose, whether it's your desire for personal growth, learning, adventure, or making a contribution to others. This life purpose helps you keep in mind that the higher the pay, the more time you can have for other things that matter to you. It's your life energy that's for sale. Be sure to sell it to the highest bidder, consistent with your integrity and your personal health and well-being. 2. Intention. Intention is the will to meet your goal or achieve your purpose. Most of us know what we want to do or ought to do, but without the intention to do it, we may procrastinate or wander off course. Weak intention, procrastination, and lack of focus are often manifestations of disabling beliefs about yourself and your capacity to achieve your goal. Look inside and see whether you can identify any disempowering beliefs, and then open your consciousness to other, more positive, possibilities. The second source of weak intention is lack of clarity about what you really want. You can't find something if you don't know what you are looking for. The more clearly you can define the job you want, the more precise you'll be in your search, and the more discerning you'll be about the offers that come to you. What is your most valuable skill, the one that commands the highest pay? What is your monetary goal, hourly wage? What are your geographical requirements, e.g., do you need to stay where you are, and, if not, where are you willing to work? What are your ethical requirements? What working conditions are essential for you? And be sure to include what you learned from step 2, finding out how much you are really trading your life energy for, as part of your criteria for job selection. A job that pays $30 an hour but has high job-related expenses and a long commute may not fit your bill anymore. 3. Willingness. Besides having strong intention, you must be willing to work for what you want. All the intention in the world won't get you a glass of water if you're not willing to go find the glass and fill it with water. To find or create a job that will meet your criteria, be active in your role as job hunter. Get out there and look for a job. Educate yourself about the job search game and play it assertively and diligently. You might need to do cold calls, promote yourself, go to networking gatherings, consult your friends, relatives, and business associates, and go online or to the library to do research. Be willing to be assertive, creative, inventive, and persistent. 4. Consciousness. You need to remain conscious during the journey. You can have all the purpose, intention, and willingness in the world, but still be unresponsive to the opportunities and obstacles that present themselves. Be conscious of all the possibilities for jobs around you. Follow up all leads. If you determine that a course of action is a dead end, stop going up that street. Interviewing people for information on possible jobs, even when they have no job to offer you, is often an effective way of uncovering a job. Always deal directly with the person who has the power to hire you. Sometimes you can create your own job by demonstrating to a prospective employer that his or her company has a need for your skills. Plot yourself a course to that ideal job and stay open to the unexpected. Finding a job is an active and interactive process. Stay conscious and you won't fall down on the job, so to speak. You can get the right job for you if you have the purpose, intention, willingness, and consciousness to find it. If you don't have the perfect job, keep running through this checklist to see where you're off course. Is your purpose clear? Do you really mean it? Are you being lazy in your search? Are you missing angles and opportunities? Keep looking. There is power in knowing that you hold the reins and are in control of how many hours, days, weeks, and years you need to work for money, in knowing that you can set an accurate goal for how much money you need to sustain yourself at the lifestyle level you choose, in knowing that once you have that amount, making money doesn't have to be the sole criterion for what you do. These insights can provide you with the motivation necessary to raise your income to new heights. 5. Recognition. Finally, you must be able to recognize when you have been successful in achieving your goal. To succeed simply means to accomplish what is intended or attempted. You steer your own success by what you choose to accomplish, and you arrive when you recognize that you have arrived. The evidence of success is not whether or not others judge you to be successful. The only evidence is whether or not you did what you intended or attempted to do. And the only person who can determine that is you. An external symbol like a trophy or a pay hike might be a nice extra, but the real sign is your inner knowing that you did what you set out to do. Without that inner knowing, you may receive many outer rewards but have no sense of inner fulfillment, and no amount of honor will ever be enough. With that inner knowing, you can achieve just about anything. 10 years before striking out on the road to FI, Marcia M. had left her marriage and raised 4 children as a single mother. She'd heard about the financial program several years before she actually took the course and had begun faithfully tracking her earnings and spending. She had no idea why that was important, but it gave her a small sense of control in an otherwise chaotic life. By the time she heard the audio recording of the seminar, her 4 children were all grown and Marcia was finally free to find her own way. While she'd done a great deal of spiritual growing since her divorce, she still experienced herself as powerless and inept when it came to money. At this time she was living with friends, exchanging labor for room and board. Determined to become financially independent, she'd walked up the deserted stretch of road where she was living to a small coastal motel and applied for a job as a maid. She was hired on the spot and walked home on cloud 9. She was on her way to FI. But when her housemates asked her how much she would be earning, she realized she'd forgotten to ask. Several months later Marcia moved to Seattle to look for a job that paid more than the minimum wage. What she lacked in sophistication she made up for in resolve. Within weeks of arriving she was living with a friend, had sewn herself a work wardrobe and was out on assignments from a temporary employment agency. Right away she put her wall chart up, and within a few months she had wiped out several $1,000s in debt. Her progress spurred her on. For every temporary position she calculated her real hourly wage. She was ruthless in evaluating each opportunity against the real cost of the work, needing to learn a new word processing program, traveling long distances, and the personalities of her co-workers were all factored into her decisions. She'd already doubled her income, from minimum wage to just about $14 an hour, but she didn't stop there. At each temporary job she was on the lookout for permanent positions. She made every contact and conversation count, and, when a supervisor at a hospital job told her of an opening as a full-time administrative assistant to a department head, Marcia went for it. On her job interview she convinced the doctor that she was just the person he was looking for, and she landed the job. Her pay shot up above $17 per hour, and she now had benefits. While she'd never had a job like this before, she drew on her years of office skills, the kind of administrative expertise it takes to raise 4 children, and the self-respect and integrity that come from following the FI program, and won the admiration of the whole staff. But she didn't give up looking. She kept reading the want ads, interviewing friends in different professions, and keeping her ear to the ground. By looking at her wall chart daily, she remained aware that the more she sold her life energy for, the quicker she'd accumulate savings and the sooner her time would be her own again. Her next opportunity came from an unexpected direction, but she was able to seize it because she was expecting opportunities. Out of her interest in health, Marcia volunteered at an annual medical conference. She just happened to be staffing the t-shirt table the first day of the meeting when the executive director of the sponsoring organization marched off the job, leaving the conference participants to fend for themselves. Marcia was part of the team of volunteers who stepped in to fill the gap. Her skills and service did not go unnoticed. When the board went looking for a new executive director, Marcia was the clear choice. So for her last 2 years of paid employment, Marcia served as the executive director of the organization. The board came increasingly to admire and rely on Marcia's integrity and expressed that through increasing her compensation. By the time she was done, her hourly salary was over $24 per hour, with an annual salary over $48,000, a figure that had been so unthinkable to the hotel maid Marcia that she now had to tape extra graph paper to the top of her wall chart to even enter her monthly income. Her earnings had gone off the chart. See Figure 71. Marcia's clear purpose, intention, willingness, and consciousness allowed her to recognize each new opportunity for higher pay and eventually to quadruple her income. Her self-image went from minimum wage worker to executive director. She made each new experience another platform from which to reach further. Her skills and background, which she'd thought added up to a career of minor league, dead-end jobs, eventually added up to executive material. All she needed to do was value her life energy, remember her purpose, engage her will and pay attention to each opportunity as it came. Step 7 is simply valuing your life energy and increasing your income, since the only purpose of paid employment is getting paid. You do this not out of greed or competition but out of self-respect and an appreciation of life. As a byproduct, you might well find yourself with less debt, more savings, more free time, more energy on the job, more energy off the job, more satisfied clients, a more satisfied family and more peace of mind. Figure 7:1 Marcia's wall chart with income summary of Step 7. Increase your income by valuing the life energy you invest in your job, exchanging it for the highest pay consistent with your health and integrity. The crossover point, the pot of gold at the end of the wall chart. By doing steps 1 through 7 you will move inexorably toward FI. You will naturally achieve financial intelligence, the ability to step back from your assumptions and emotions about money and observe them dispassionately. You will know how much you have, how much you spend and how much of your life energy you're investing in each aspect of your chosen lifestyle. Most of your old Gazingas pins will no longer grab your attention, and those few that make it past the cash register will look like fool's gold very soon afterward. By following the first 7 steps you will also increase your financial integrity. Your handling of money will be more and more integrated with other aspects of your life. All facets of your finances will be in alignment with your values. These changes alone may lead to a substantial increase in your financial independence. Your expenses may go down, your income up, your debt may disappear and your savings increase. You may even find yourself doing more sharing and repairing instead of just buying your way through life. The freedom you will experience from just these changes will feel like a miracle of fiscal rebirth. Money will no longer be a problem in your life, and the creativity that was locked in the constant struggle with your finances will be released for making other, bigger dreams come true. With Step 8 the possibility of complete financial independence opens up. Naturally we will all be financially independent sometime between now and the day we die. When they say you can't take it with you, that doesn't just mean your stuff. It also means your job and all your money worries. That's the rest in peace part. The only thing under debate is when. Step 8 shows you how you can cooperate with that inevitability and perhaps leave paid employment a lot sooner than you ever thought possible. We will also hear stories about other people who have reached that goal and what they chose to work on once money wasn't an issue. Figure 8:1 Marcia's wall chart with income and expenses. In Chapter 7 we saw Marcia M's wall chart with her income line going off the top. Let's take a look at it again, this time adding the expense line, see Figure 8:1. Having lived on the edge of poverty for so many years, Marcia M didn't have a lot of big spender habits to contend with, so her expense line soon settled in at around $950 a month. What doesn't show up on the chart is the change in her discretionary spending from entertainment to fill the void to activities in support of my purpose, and the fact that her feeling of inner peace went steadily up. Her income line, as we said in Chapter 7, went off the chart, not only from her professional work but also from some part-time piecework she did for a small local company. Marcia's chart is fairly typical for a dyed-in-the-wool frugal person whose earning power goes through the ceiling. Figure 8-2 Diane's wall chart with expenses and income. Diane's chart, see Figure 8-2, is typical of a fairly steady earner and heavy spender who diligently applied the principles of this program and cut her spending in half. The first things to go were the extravagances that clearly gave her no fulfillment: disappointing travel and entertainment. The next to go were the automatic spending habits that added nothing to the quality of her life: daily restaurant meals, for example, and buying clothes out of boredom. And finally she found less expensive ways to have the things she wanted: moving to a less costly apartment, taking budget ski trips, and trading in her sporty gas guzzler for a fuel-efficient car. All of it, she affirms, added to the quality of her life and her self-esteem. What you see in both these charts is a growing gap between income and expenses, i.e., savings. Before FI thinking takes over, a normal person might regard those savings as earmarked for a splurge in the future, a down payment on a bigger house, or a whiz-bang vacation to the ends of the earth. But FI thinking sees those savings in a different light. FI thinking calls that gap capital. Savings versus capital. Savings are funds put aside from time to time and kept unexpended. You are usually saving for something, if only a rainy day. Capital, however, is money that makes more money. Capital is money that keeps working for you, that produces an income as surely as your job produces income. When you put savings in the bank is just a safe place to store your money until you need it. The interest you get is a nice byproduct of having a bank account, but it is not the purpose of the account. When you put capital in a bank or other interest-bearing instrument, however, it is an investment. An investment is the conversion of capital into some form of wealth other than cash with the expectation of deriving income. There are two basic forms of investment: speculation and debt instruments, loans. Stocks, real estate, venture capital, and the like are speculative investments. You hope, speculate, that the value of what you buy will increase and you will make a profit. Debt, on the other hand, is lending your capital to another and charging them interest for the privilege of using your money for a specified period of time. At the end of that time your capital is returned to you intact, ready for you to loan out again. Bonds are an example of a debt instrument. In Chapter 9 we will go into detail about an FI investment program, but for now it's enough to realize that your savings are actually capital that is making money for you. The income you receive from your capital is of a different nature than your job income. It comes in whether or not you go to work. Instead of simply lumping it with your total monthly income, you will be entering it separately on your wall chart according to the formula given below. This third line will be called monthly investment income. Step 8, Capital and the crossover point. Each month, apply the following formula to your total accumulated capital and record the result on your wall chart. Your total accumulated capital is simply the money you have, usually in a savings account, that you are not planning to spend. For the current interest rate, don't use what you get on your savings account. Instead use the current yield of long-term U.S. Treasury bonds or, perhaps, certificates of deposit, CDs. You can find these figures online or in the financial sections of major newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. Treasury bond figure is one of the best reflections of prevailing interest rates on debt instruments. It is a conservative estimate of the return you can expect from such a long-term investment. For arithmetic simplicity we will use 4%, but this is a convenience for our discussion only and not a prediction or a promise about what interest rates will be when you are ready to invest. When Joe retired, interest rates were in the 6% range. At the time of this update, interest rates hover at 4.5%. What we know for sure about the financial world is that even the safest investments go up and down. At the moment, Don't worry too much about that number, just use the current rate. For example, let's say you have $100 of savings. If you were to consider that $100 capital and invest it in a bond that pays 4% interest, the equation would look this way. Remember that these figures are purely hypothetical. For illustration, only for every $100 thus invested, you will get $0.33 per month, each month, for the life of the bond. The original $100 remains untouched and you will eventually get it back. So if on the first month of your chart you have $1,000 in savings and the current interest rate is 4%, your equation will read, this simply means that the $1,000 you now have in savings has the power to bring in $3.33 every month if you consider it capital and invest it in a bond. In this example, you would post $3.33 on your wall chart, using a pen of yet a different color. We'll see in a moment how that looks on Marsha's wall chart. Sure, it's a tiny figure compared to the towering spikes on your wall chart that represent your job income, but it's still $3.33 a month, $40 a year, for the life of that bond. For fun, try translating that into something tangible, some expense you consider necessary for survival. It could be the number of pounds of rice you use in a month, or a couple weeks of coffee beans, or part of your telephone bill. Keep applying the equation to your total accumulated savings each month. For example, if you save another $500 during the second month, add it to your previous total of $1,000 and your equation for that month will look like this. Post this figure and connect it to the previous one. After a number of months, your chart will show a third line creeping up from the bottom. This line represents monthly investment income, see figure 8-3. Once you've saved $5,000, you can invest it according to the criteria outlined in Chapter 9. The income from that investment will become part of your monthly investment income figure, along with the figure derived from applying the formula to your further savings. The next $5,000 you accumulate will be invested in the same way, and the next and the next and the next. Let's go back to Marsha's chart and see how that looks, see figure 8-4. Since she started out with some debt, Marsha's monthly investment income line didn't even show up until about a year after she took the hotel maid job. Once she started accumulating savings and converting them to capital, however, her monthly investment income kept going up. In January of year 4, for example, Marsha has a monthly investment income of $215, while her expenses are $845. By the next January, her monthly investment income is $350 and her expenses are still in that $950 range. Now look at February of year 6. Her monthly investment income is $545, and her expenses are still within the $950 range. What you are seeing at work here is not only Marsha's increasing salary, but also what's known as the magic of compound interest. The interest earned on her capital is being added back to her capital, thus she is earning interest on the interest, and her capital is increased by that amount. Figure 8-3, applying formula to capital to get monthly investment income and entering on wall chart. What this means for you is that even if the amount added to your capital each month is a constant increment, example your monthly savings are always $500, the compound interest would make sure that the monthly investment income line on your chart would actually curve upward, rather than remaining straight. As you'll notice, an interesting trend is developing in Marsha's wall chart. That modest yet ever-increasing monthly investment income line is steadily gaining on the fairly stable monthly expenses line. We'll see the significance of this in a moment. But for now, all we need to notice is that by simply doing the steps, month in and month out, Marsha's investment income is headed up. This will also happen to you. Figure 8-4, Marsha's wall chart with monthly investment income, the crossover point. One day, while you're looking at your wall chart, you will realize that you can project your monthly investment income line into the future, see figure 8-5. Because you have established a fairly steady trend in your total monthly expenses, you can reasonably project that line into the future as well, see figure 8-6. you will notice that at some foreseeable time in the future those two lines, total monthly expenses and monthly investment income, will cross. We call that the crossover point, figure 8 to 7. Beyond the crossover point, income from your investment capital will be higher than your monthly expenses. The crossover point provides us with our final definition of financial independence. At the crossover point, where monthly investment income crosses above monthly expenses, you will be financially independent in the traditional sense of that term. You will have a safe, steady income for life from a source other than a job. Figure 8 to 5 projecting your monthly investment income. Figure 8 to 6 projecting your total monthly expenses. Figure 8 to 7 the crossover point, the power of working for a finite period of time. This realization has had a powerful impact on many people. Think about it. If you see your life as bigger than your job and can conceive of having to work for money for only a finite and foreseeable period of time, then you are likely to be an even more highly motivated, high-integrity worker. The qualities of self-assurance, high motivation, dedication, integrity, joyful pride of workmanship and responsibility that you adopt as you learn to value your life energy are squared when you realize that if you choose you may work for money for only a finite period of time. When Kevin C., a human resources employee in a big corporation, was able to calculate, from years of tracking, evaluating, and charting, see figure 8 to 8, that he would reach the crossover point within a finite period of time, 18 months to be exact, he went through a metamorphosis at work that even astounded him. Figure 8 to 8 Kevin and Catherine's financials. Finally I saw financial independence was going to happen. We were right on schedule for it. I stopped worrying about whether anybody was going to fire me or whether I would get laid off, or whether I stepped on toes, and it was extremely empowering. His wife said he'd come home from work saying, "I'm bulletproof. I'm bulletproof. I just started going gangbusters at work." It was kind of scary from just about everybody else's perspective too, because I had phenomenal energy and incredible confidence. I negotiated some of the toughest settlements that I probably ever negotiated during those 6 or 8 months, and I did not lose. Not only did I not lose, I prevailed big time on everything. If a manager really screwed up bad on something, I said, "Okay, send them to me and I'll fix it." It worked out really well for the company and for me. Take a minute to think about what would happen if you knew that you would have to work for money for a limited, foreseeable length of time, say, 5 years, instead of that vague limbo of working until traditional retirement. Wouldn't you feel like putting a lot more of yourself into that job, knowing that it's only for a limited period of time? Wouldn't it make the boredom more bearable and the challenges more interesting? If you are close to retirement age, how does it feel to consider shaving off a few years in the workplace and adding them to your retirement years? One of the cornerstones of this program, for those wishing to go all the way to financial independence, is concentrating on making money now so that you don't have to make money later. You are thus committing yourself to intensively earning money, without selling out your integrity or endangering your health, for a limited period of time. Until Steve W., the carpenter, caught on to the implications of the finite period of time, he thought the FI course was just a well-crafted presentation of principles he already knew. He'd even kept track of all of his expenses at one point in his life, but he never figured out what to do with the record, so he quit. What the FI program showed him, however, was how all the pieces could work together to create a life that was meaningful and that reflected his real self. In a letter to us he wrote, "The high point for me was realizing that I could work at my job for a finite amount of time. That transformed my whole attitude. As I sat listening, my heart rate quickened, my palms became sweaty, my energy level soared, and I started yelling, 'Yes! Yes!' I also started laughing and crying at the same time. I realized that I could throw myself into my job with passion and a clear goal, increase my productivity and have a tangible product, a magnificent product, a long sought after result in about 5 to 7 years. I can't tell you how liberating that was and is. In not too many years, Steve plans to be a full-time writer. He hopes to make money from his writing, but he won't have to sell stories to cover his expenses. There will be no starving artist routine for Steve. He'll go from being a craftsman with wood to being a craftsman with words, with no worries about how to pay the bills. Penny Y had a secluded cabin in the country to which she escaped on as many weekends as possible. One weekend she and some friends were walking around a pond on the land. Everyone was captivated by the serenity and beauty of the setting and the unhurried pace of the stroll. Then Penny noticed herself computing how long it would be before she'd have to go back to the city and go to work. In that moment she committed herself to the finite period. She said, "Financial independence means that I don't have to extra enjoy this minute, because in the next minute it will be taken away from me." From that moment, it's like there's been no end to the size of the box my life fits into. Now, for me, the sky's the limit. Roger R. is a homesteader who wants us to inhabit the heartland of this country. When he and his wife, Carrie, decided to try to align their personal economy with the planet's ecology, they returned to their hometown in Kansas. They bought some land from a friend, tore down an old barn for lumber, and built a passive solar house with the help of 60 friends and Roger's father, a carpenter and stonemason. At the same time, Roger worked for his father hauling trash, while Carrie went to nursing school to learn a consistently marketable skill. In everything they did, they tried to embody their values: self-sufficiency, household economy, energy efficiency, and eating what grew in their own garden or was locally grown. They took things slowly, being careful to pay as they went and not get in over their heads. Ideally, they hoped to eliminate over half of the standard expenses, like rent, as well as most food and utilities, and live below taxable levels. Collecting trash took only 5 hours a day. Roger not only enjoyed his work, but even got all his work clothes from the trash, maximum fulfillment from minimal means. Meanwhile, Carrie worked 2 days a week as a nurse. Life was sweet and they were getting ends to meet almost. But several things happened on their way to Eden: 2 children, health insurance, buying the trash business from Roger's father, a car that quit, and a house that just kept crying out for small improvements. Underneath the trappings of living simply, they were caught in the classic "too much month at the end of the money and where does it all go" syndrome. Eden, it seemed, could be as much of a trap as the suburbs. At this point they did the FI program. When Roger saw the implications of the finite period of time, his life opened up. Garbage collecting was all well and good, but the thought of doing it for the rest of his life was not attractive. What really fired his imagination was the possibility of being financially self-sufficient and dedicating himself to developing a sustainable yield homestead on their 4 acres and helping his neighbors to discover the right mix and rotation for sustainably raising cattle, wheat, feed grains, and other crops in the semi-arid grasslands of western Kansas. He wants to do this not only for himself but for the larger community. He sees the small farmers disappearing. Every year the population in his part of the country goes down while the average age goes up. He wants to change that through his own example. Perhaps, he muses, young people could go to the city for 10 years to become financially independent, return to the heartland with their cash needs taken care of, and then regenerate subsistence farming and small town living. Perhaps his small efforts could create a good life not only for his family but for other families and rural America as well. The finite period of time opened Roger's options from years of garbage collecting to a future filled with practical dreams. 4 years after doing the FI course, Roger reached his personal crossover point. His investment income matched his trash income. He could stop working for money and start working for his dreams. What about you? Is there a second career inside you, waiting to come out? Do you have a talent that's never been developed? Are you extra enjoying those moments of freedom away from the workplace because you've had no hope of retiring before you're 65? Do you have a dream for yourself and for your community that you'd like to make real? What would working at your job for a finite period of time mean to you? The beauty of this program is that financial independence is the byproduct of following the steps. You don't need to have financial self-sufficiency as your goal in order to arrive there. You just have to devote yourself to aligning your earning and spending with your values and with what brings you true fulfillment. The concept of a finite period of time is a secondary rocket propelling you toward FI, not the primary thrust. For people who are highly motivated to leave paid employment in order to follow another dream, the finite period of time is like the lure of the stables to a horse heading home after a long ride. The homing instinct takes over and you fly toward the goal. But whether you reach financial independence in 5 years or 20, at 30 as co-author Joe did, or at 65 as most Americans do, awareness that you're working for only a finite period will provide continued motivation to see your life as bigger than your job. Financial independence, having enough and then some at the crossover point, where the income from your invested capital surpasses your monthly expenses, your basic life necessities and all the components of your chosen lifestyle, are covered by your monthly investment income. At the crossover point you have enough and then some. Your wall chart provides indisputable evidence of how much it costs to maintain your optimal lifestyle. Every month you've asked yourself the questions about fulfillment and values, and your expenses line elegantly reflects that process of honest self-evaluation. You know with certainty that spending any more money would leave you cold. It's not that you've whittled your expenses down to bare subsistence. You've simply brought your life into harmony, and you just happen to know, to the penny, how much harmony costs. You are certain that your monthly investment income is enough, not out of wishful thinking, but out of hard evidence. But what about that phrase "and then some"? If you're to feel totally comfortable relying on your monthly investment income, it's important to feel that you have some elbow room, some room for what-ifs. That need for latitude is built right into the program. Remember your projections of how each spending category might look after FI. Your FI lifestyle probably costs less than your job-associated lifestyle, and this difference is part of that and then some. Yes, some costs may rise, depending on the perks of your job, but overall most people find life far less expensive once they've retired. So this is what gives you some elbow room in exploring your new circumstance. Some fears have even penciled in a fourth line on the wall chart that tracks that post-FI expense figure, giving themselves a vivid piece of evidence for that and then some. But the crossover point isn't reached until your monthly investment income line actually crosses your monthly expenses line, even though you may have determined, through experience and careful projections, that your expenses could be lower. Rosemary I took additional precautions. Once she had reached the crossover point, she took an honest look at whether her intense need for security was actually convinced she'd be okay. In truth, she was still inwardly biting her nails. "How much more do I need to satisfy you?" she asked her inner warrior. $100 a month plus buying the best camping equipment, tent, hiking boots, rain gear, backpack, the warrior shot back. "Reasonable," Rosemary replied, as she knew the money would indeed soften any financial shocks and backpacking was both a love and a possible way of life if need be. She continued to work for another 6 months, squirreling away every penny until she met her financial goal and then springing for the best equipment she could find. Her and then some felt just right. To this day, her FI income covers the basics, even as her lifestyle has shifted dramatically, requiring her to work part-time to increase her and then some by a few more $100. Since she, like so many of us, never really thought of herself as daily growing older, Marcia M. was surprised to find herself 65 and eligible for another source of and then some, U.S. Social Security. She had gotten to her enough and then some purely through doing the steps of this program, so her Social Security was icing on her FI cake. She used some for additional travel while saving the rest to cover the unknowns of aging. In Chapter 9 you'll learn about another part of the and then some, the additional savings we recommend you accumulate to handle the month-to-month fluctuations in expenses as well as emergencies. Also in Chapter 9 you'll learn the nitty-gritty details of setting up a good FI investment program to give you a safe, steady income for life, including how to build in or increase your cushion or safety net. For now, it's important simply to recognize that your wall chart is a powerful antidote to anxiety about the future. At the crossover point you have achieved financial independence. You have broken the link between work and money in your own life. Celebrating financial independence, it's time to celebrate. You have accomplished a mighty feat. You have restructured your life around what is most fulfilling and valuable to you. You have dedicated yourself to replacing financial fictions with financial facts, challenging many old beliefs about yourself, your money and your life. You have woken up from the dream that more is better and defined what is enough for you. You have become accountable with your life energy, tracking and evaluating the flow of money into and out of your life. You have developed an internal yardstick for fulfillment, liberating yourself from the sway of advertising and peer pressure. You have explored your values and personal purpose, and have increasingly oriented your life around what really matters to you. You have grasped ever wider implications of your relationship with money, including what impact your spending habits might have on other people and on the planet. You have accomplished this by defining your purpose, having the intention to achieve your purpose, being willing to do whatever it took to arrive at your goal, and staying conscious at every step of the process. Now is the moment for recognition, for realizing that you have arrived at your destination. Have a party, call a friend, send out announcements to everyone in your address book, or just smile knowingly into a campfire. Do whatever it takes to let yourself know that you have just passed over a major threshold into freedom. Breaking the link between work and money in actual fact will exponentially expand the possibility of discovering your true work, of reintegrating the disparate pieces of your life, and of being truly whole. You will be free to work for your values and your dreams, not just for money. You will find that this freedom will affect your life in many ways. Prime among them is that the realm of choice is now expanded. You have opened the door to many new options in your life. You can stop working for money. This doesn't mean you must stop working for money. It simply means you can stop working for money. If your job has been robotic or stifling, robbing you of the best years of your life, you can now stop working for money and explore other pathways. You might start out with some simple pleasures, like not waking up to an alarm clock, or not wearing a watch, or staying in your bathrobe all day. Enjoy the delicious feeling of playing hooky for as long as it delights you. Do nothing proudly for as long as you are truly getting fulfillment from it. Whatever activity, or inactivity, you felt starved for while you had your nose to the grindstone, you can have now for as long as you like. Most people find they like laziness far less than they imagined. Eventually they find themselves dusting off other dreams, and you may too. Any one you pick will draw you into a new life pattern. Or, if you enjoy your work, what you do, but dislike your job, who or what you're doing it for, you might find yourself doing the same things, only differently. The irony of her post-FI work is not lost on Diane G. Since achieving financial independence, she frequently finds herself sitting at a computer terminal doing programming. But now it's completely different. Using skills that are as natural to her as speaking, she has helped a variety of nonprofit organizations improve their bottom lines, providing service. She has worked with a self-help group of homeless people, an institute providing education about sustainability, and a networking center for environmental activists, to name just a few. From the outside you might not be able to tell whether she's designing a form for an insurance company or helping to ensure a better future for the world, but Diane knows the difference. Her work is totally voluntary and utterly satisfying. As the saying goes, she wouldn't take money for this work if you paid her. While many fears like Diane have made a choice not to accept money for anything they do after they reach FI, this is not part of the FI program. It is a totally individual and personal choice. Catherine D. discovered after she and her husband Kevin C. fulfilled their first FI dream, a year in a motorhome traveling the United States tip to tail, and their second FI dream, a year of leading successful educational programs based on the FI program, that she was at loose ends. She loved quilting, but after a while even that wasn't enough. She actually found herself looking back lovingly on some aspects of her pre-FI work. She decided to get a higher degree to be able to do her former work at a higher level and on her own schedule. She chose again what she'd chosen as a young woman and saw her fulfillment increase. Others, as they discover the joys of volunteering, become increasingly unwilling to tether themselves to a salary and the compromises that tend to go along with it. They discover, for themselves and from their own experience, a principle common to many of the world's religions. One such statement, from the New Testament, is, "No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Point 1. Once you reach your crossover point, this is one of the many choices you'll have the leisure and luxury to contemplate: to work for money or not to work for money. That is the question. Of course, you can as easily continue working for money, but you can approach it in a whole new way. Several years ago we came across the story of Ron, a successful tea maker from Northern California. When he was already well established financially, he and his wife traveled to the Third World to adopt 2 children. This direct exposure to the way people were suffering changed Ron's life. He was especially moved by the plight of Third World children who, he learned, were dying from both disease and dehydration due to diarrhea at the rate of 15 million a year. He wanted to do something about it, but what? He wasn't a doctor or a health worker or even a fundraiser. The only thing he knew how to do well was manufacture tea. And therein lies this tale. He went back home and started manufacturing tea again, but with a twist. He had realized that he could live very well on the interest on his capital and investments, so he was able to donate all proceeds from his tea company to his new relief agency that provided children with medicine. In the first year of operation, the company raised $30,000 for refugees in northern Africa, and he was projecting $45,000 on a total revenue of $600,000. And unlike charities, it does not rely on people being able to give but on people who like the tea. It's so simple, it's ridiculous. The catch is, there is no catch. 2. Ron is also a great example of how obvious FI thinking is whether or not you follow this particular program. Through some restructuring of their finances, Ted and Martha P. were able to achieve financial independence fairly soon after doing the FI program. While they both knew that they wanted their lives to serve some purpose higher than just getting by, neither knew just what that purpose would be. Since Ted had worked in real estate, he thought of contributing to the solution of the affordable housing problem and joined Habitat for Humanity. Over time he realized that, while the mission was right, the form of participation was wrong for him. Then inspiration struck. What he did well was sell real estate. Why not do that for love and donate his commissions to causes in which he and his clients believed? He began working with his clients to determine which organization they would like to support, and then, when the transaction is complete, donates 40% of his commission to the designated nonprofit organization. A win for everyone and an inspiring model for others. For Martha, parenting is her career. When their son arrived, they both chose to stay home with him as much as possible. Both Ted and Martha continue to explore the right mix of activities, but nothing is done out of financial necessity. Security, Martha says, doesn't come from outer symbols. FI feels less like steering and more like going for the ride. The blessings just keep coming. There are so many options for meaningful work. Work is now a process of discovering how to express my understanding of what life is rather than trying to make more money. Jacques Blix and David Heitmiller's first post-FI project was to write Getting a Life, a book of stories from people who'd followed the FI program. They did it as service and did everyone who wants to follow this program a service by fleshing out these steps with more real-life stories. But ironically, with the choice to write the book came a hefty advance. Just as we had chosen to give away through our nonprofit, the New Roadmap Foundation, the income from our FI education work, Jacques and Dave wanted to do the same. They donated 95% of their advance to the New Roadmap Foundation as well, and for years we worked together to eventually pass along a total of $1 million, in 800 small grants, to organizations dedicated to a sustainable future. Even after they discovered years later that some life challenges meant they needed to bring in a little extra income, they never rued this choice. Dave loves handyman work and does it very part-time to supplement their FI income. Jacques found a form of yoga she loved and did it so regularly she became a pinch-hit teacher for the class. They spend all the time they want traveling, often visiting the fears they profiled in Getting a Life. They relish grandparenting and do it as much as possible. Jacques makes beautiful quilts. Dave loves bicycling. Life is full, good, and financially secure. What new twist might you be able to put on your job or profession if you didn't have to work for money? Might you stay on the job but donate some or even all of your income to causes you care about? Might you try out a new profession that would offer more satisfaction but less income? For many people, earning money is one of the satisfactions that comes from working, but that income takes on a whole new meaning when it isn't needed to pay the bills. FI is time for yourself. Have you ever seen around to it? They usually hang on the refrigerators of procrastinators, reminding them of all the things they want to do when they get around to it. What are your someday things? As in, someday I'll paint the house, read all of Shakespeare, have time to fish, travel around the world, spend a whole weekend alone with my partner, straighten out the attic, take a course in watercolor painting, volunteer at the local food bank, try out all the programs that came with my computer, hike the Appalachian Trail, study about issues and write letters to my congresspeople, run a marathon. Take some time right now to list a few of your own someday plans. After the crossover point, the biggest barrier to doing those things will disappear from your to-do list, your job. In step 2 you calculated the actual hours per week you devote to your job, all things considered. If you choose to leave your job, those hours are now free time. In this sense, FI is the ultimate time management tool. Instead of gaining a minute here and there through careful planning, you can gain 10 hours a day. Of course, you'll have a new set of time management challenges in structuring your day around the myriad things you want to do, but the kind of self-esteem and self-discipline that has gotten you to this point will help you through any difficulty you might encounter with having time on your hands. Most fears' lives are so full they say they don't know how they had time for a job. And the ones you love, time with people, both family and friends, becomes a priority for many people who reach financial independence. Marcia M. achieved financial independence right after coordinating her second highly successful medical conference. Her expenses have remained around $950 a month and she hasn't scrimped on anything she's really wanted to have or do. Marcia's path to financial independence clarified many aspects of her life. After achieving financial independence, she had time to bring this clarity to her relationships with her family and heal the wounds of the past, particularly unfinished business from her difficult marriage and subsequent divorce. She took the relationships with various members of her family off maintenance status and made them a priority. Her total attention allowed a great deal of pain from the past to surface and be addressed. Her reconciliation with her children, her siblings, and her mother took some work and determination, but there were as many surprises and gifts as there had been resentments and sorrows. What Marcia got from this investment of time was peace of mind, something no job, however lucrative, could have given her. What relationships in your life have you put on the back burner? Has friendship been replaced by strategic business relationships? Has your family survived on the scraps of time left over from an all-consuming job? And what about your relationship with yourself? Has that taken a back seat as well? What if you had the time you needed to write in a journal or go fishing or just sit on a hillside and think? Being able to reflect on your life while you're living it, instead of in the instant before you die, is one key to fulfillment, however you go about it. When you're working full-time, though, quiet time can seem like just one more thing to do in an already overcrowded schedule. Voluntary action, the freedom to choose what you do and do what you choose, as we said, just because you don't have to work after the crossover point doesn't mean you can't or won't. Even if your highest aspiration initially was not to have to get up to an alarm clock, eventually you do get up. And once you've done your someday things, you will still have lots of life left to fill. Most people who achieve financial independence eventually go back to work, but now they work because they choose to, not because they must. They work voluntarily. And they often work, happily, more hours than they did on the job. What would your work feel like if you were working, perhaps even at the job you now do, totally voluntarily? What aspects wouldn't change a bit? What aspects might you eliminate entirely? What decisions might you make that you aren't free to make now? If you've been in the workforce so long that working voluntarily seems odd to you, think about those things you do now that are voluntary. Why do you clean your house, sing in the church choir, serve on committees, stroll in nature with your camera in search of the perfect shot, sit on boards for nonprofit groups, play with your kids, swing a hammer for Habitat for Humanity, weed your garden, learn to tango, go to meetings at your children's school, make love, meditate, go out for pizza with your friends, call your mother on weekends, and the millions of other things you do voluntarily? You do them because you choose to, because you anticipate getting fulfillment, not money from them. Voluntary action can serve your values and your chosen purpose. Volunteerism redefined. Another word for voluntary action is volunteering. In an era when everything, from childcare to housework to shopping for clothes, is professionalized, volunteers are sometimes regarded as second-class citizens, less skilled, less trained, and less productive than paid employees and, especially, professionals with a few letters after their name. Yet what the word volunteer used to point to, and could again, is a kind of activity that is more robust, self-responsible, and self-expressive than the notion of volunteers as adjuncts to the real business of the world. Volunteers are people who are free to act whenever, wherever, and however they choose, and work for their values and their deepest beliefs about life. Paid employees may do that as well, but there's often as much, or more, pragmatism as principle in the job they do. Volunteers remind us about the best part of being human precisely because they work for love, not money. While some people fear that having too many volunteers would create competition for jobs with workers who need the pay to survive, the kind of creative, self-motivated volunteers we are talking about will function more like entrepreneurs than like strike breakers. As a volunteer, you might initiate projects and processes that will eventually need paid employees to administrate and carry out. Volunteers have historically pointed to social needs that eventually get funded and even become professions. Visionaries eventually need educators to implement and teach their ideas. As a volunteer, you can operate like human venture capital, increasing job opportunities for others in your community. Taking fulfillment through the ceiling. Returning to the fulfillment curve, we can see that at the point of maximum fulfillment you have a choice. You can continue to work for your own needs and desires, to buy more possessions or experiences, or you can work for something larger than yourself that gives to others and the world. You can consume or you can create. As we said earlier, once you have enough, it's the commitment to giving that takes that fulfillment line straight up off the top of the chart. That's what volunteering brings to your life. See figure 8 to 9 for this new paradigm fulfillment curve. Redefining volunteers as social and cultural entrepreneurs could well be as transforming as redefining work or money. Fulfillment above the fulfillment curve peak comes in part from making a contribution from service. Volunteering is just one strategy for service to others and to the world. The accumulation that constitutes your enough is about getting. The freedom above the peak is about giving via work, attention, care, and presence. Figure 8 to 9 the fulfillment curve. Beyond consumption, as a volunteer you have a huge set of freedoms, the freedom to do the kind of work you choose whether or not you have the credentials and whether or not you get paid for it. The freedom to speak the truth and never bend your principles for the sake of job security. The freedom to structure your time in a way that best works for you. The freedom to continue using the skills you already have and are comfortable with, or to push yourself to learn new ones. In short, as a volunteer you have choice. Following are the stories of several people who made different choices of what to do with their post-FI lives. We met Jason and Nedra Y in Chapter 2 at the beginning of their journey. They achieved financial independence by building and managing a successful house cleaning business, and entered into an exciting career as volunteers. For the first few post-crossover months they visited family and friends, did the reading and thinking they'd put on hold during the whirlwind of running a complex business, and did research on projects they might like to assist. It was love at first sight when they visited an organization dedicated to helping disabled children from Mexico get needed surgery in the United States. Jason and Nedra thoroughly enjoyed helping out. As a lover of children, working and playing with the Mexican children was Nedra's idea of heaven. Meanwhile, Jason took on the installation of a pump to improve the Mexican project's water supply, something he'd never done but welcomed as a challenge. In addition, both Nedra and Jason served as drivers for the van that shuttled children up to San Francisco for operations. In between projects, they enjoyed camping in their motorhome. Their blend of mobility, skills, and willingness to try new things made them an invaluable volunteer team. Penny Y's story illustrates helping and caring as a way of life. Penny Y's post-crossover life has been as exuberant and many-faceted as she is. She's worked with a group called Friends of the Elderly, delivering flowers and meals to an 83-year-old woman who crossed the line from client to close friend. Penny's life was so enriched by the relationship that it was no longer clear who was helping whom. Penny also volunteered 1 day a week with a collective that recycles white office paper. She loved and believed in the work, and she got the added benefit of group health insurance. She also distributed leaflets for the local food co-op. Not only did she get 24% off her food bill, but because of a medical condition she needed to walk, and leafleting gives her a good excuse. "People think I'm so virtuous," Penny said with a laugh, "but they have to drag into work every day, and I'm out here in the sun and they are telling me I have a hard life." And this isn't all Penny has done. She started a local chapter of a national activist organization for busy people called 2020's Vision. She's applied for membership in the Quaker Church, a luxury she didn't have time for when she was working 70 hours a week. And she's also been a real friend to her friends. "I'm not distressed. I can listen to people. I'm free therapy because I don't have to go to a job." Ed Dwight W's choices led him into activism and advocacy. He is an example of how a full-time, focused and self-directed volunteer can transform a moderately effective group into a powerhouse. As the son of well-to-do parents and a very bright and energetic young man, Ed Dwight W. was expected to go to all the right schools, become a lawyer and go into politics. But his idealism got in the way. A few months before he received a substantial inheritance, he did the FI course, taking 2 days instead of the recommended one so that the information would really sink in. His inheritance became his FI capital. After some soul-searching and some hesitancy, he decided to jump into full-time volunteering. The cause that called him most strongly was bridging the misunderstandings between nations and cultures that eventually lead to war. He served as executive director of an organization of returned Peace Corps volunteers who wanted to recapture some of the heroic spirit they'd felt during their service abroad. Ed Dwight later began working for another nonprofit group, organizing cooperative tree planting projects for young people from all parts of the world. Perhaps as these young adults assume leadership, the memory of working together with others of different nations and cultures will guide them in creating a more peaceful world. Ed Dwight's dedication to these projects allowed him and the other staff members to focus less on fundraising than on carrying out projects, and filled the office with his unique blend of high spirits and intelligence. Precisely because they aren't paid professionals, volunteers can be experimental and intuitive. Volunteers are powerful by virtue of being free. But what would I do? If this kind of freedom seems either too far-reaching or too scary to contemplate right now, go back to Chapter 4 where we explored purpose and values. Follow Joanna Macy's suggestions. What are some ways you can work with your passion, with projects and causes that move you and touch your heart? How might you work with your pain, helping others heal wounds you yourself have healed? What about working with what's at hand, with the small but pressing needs that surround each one of us if we would only open our eyes? Whatever you do, wherever you start, remember that your life as a volunteer will unfold organically. Author Edward Abbey is reported to have said, when asked about his career, "I don't have a career, I have a life." Once you're out of the 9-to-5 straitjacket, you too will have a life. Rather than climbing a career ladder, you will be following the promptings of your heart and mind and may find yourself on some side roads that are more interesting and enjoyable than any job you could have ever imagined. Life after the crossover point. The essence of FI is choice. Once you've passed the crossover point, you have choice about how you fill the hours of your day and the days of your productive life. There is no formula for how you live after the crossover point. And that's the point. You are free to invent your life. You are free to explore what Buckminster Fuller meant when he said, "We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims." You have a choice. Summary of Step 8. Each month apply the following equation to your total accumulated capital and post the monthly investment income as a separate line on your wall chart. When you begin investing your money according to the guidelines offered in the next chapter, start entering your actual interest income for your monthly investment income on your wall chart, while still applying the formula to your further savings. After trends become clear, project that line to the crossover point. You will then have an estimate of how much time you will have to work before reaching financial independence. Now that you've got it, what are you going to do with it? Step 9. Managing your finances. This step will help you become knowledgeable and sophisticated about long-term income-producing investments and manage your finances for a consistent income sufficient to your needs over the long term. Congratulations and welcome. You've arrived at Step 9, making your money make enough money over the long haul to meet your needs. You may be reading this simply as the last chapter of this book, but what follows is intended less for the general reader. You may have skipped right to it to see what hot investment advice Yet One More Money book might have to offer, but this is definitely not intended for the general investor. This is primarily for those who've arrived at the crossover point and are wondering, now that I've got it, what am I going to do with it? Those familiar with the first edition of Your Money or Your Life will notice quite a few changes in this chapter. The strategy Joe Dominguez designed for himself in the 60s and stood behind until he died in the mid-90s was investing in U.S. Treasury bonds to ensure maximum safety of capital and stability of income. However, 12 years have passed since he died and 17 since first publication, and I now know that fears themselves, myself included, have invested in more than bonds for their finest egg. As Joe's co-author, I want to present this broader menu of options not to replace his basic sound counsel but to augment it. Also, times do change. When Joe retired in 1969, interest rates were above 6.5% and inflation was below 3%. When I invested the bulk of my money in the early 1980s, the United States was in deep recession and interest rates on the bonds I bought then were well over 10%. Current yield on the U.S. 30-year Treasury bond is 4.5%, but inflation is over 5.5%. If these conditions were to hold over the long term, your finest egg would buy less every year. History tells us that these conditions will change and change again by the time your eyes read these words. It may be that Treasury bonds will again be the best way to assure yourself a steady income for life. Or you might choose other strategies with greater risk but potentially greater reward. In addition to providing you with Joe's full explanation about what bonds are, why they are good for fears and how to buy them, this chapter presents a variety of other investment options that fears have picked. When you are putting your nest egg into your long-term FI3 strategy, you will have to do your own research and think for yourself to determine which of these investment options is best for you, a capacity you surely have if you have followed the program so far. Joe's advice. Joe always tried to give novices the minimum information needed to invest with assurance. But with his advice he always delivered a warning. Nothing is certain. Nothing. That's life. If you don't like it, you're out of luck. If someone tells you they have a foolproof method for making money effortlessly and you follow it, Joe would have said that you are the fool. Here's a cautionary tale. In the old days, when Joe taught only interested friends his FI approach, he would give them a gift when they reached FI3. He'd give them a bond. A yellowing Russian Tsarist bond. Before there were online brokerage accounts or registered bonds, bonds had coupons that you actually clipped and brought to the bank to get your semi-annual interest. The coupons on Joe's gift bonds were clipped all the way until 1917, when the Russian Revolution rendered them worthless. 50 years later, Joe bought a box of these bonds for a penny or so a piece, thinking at the time they'd be amusing wallpaper. One, giving them to newly minted Phi-3 was his reminder that no investment you make guarantees that geopolitical or economic conditions will not shift, or protects you from finding that the nest egg you thought would give you a comfortable income for life won't. Buyer of investments, beware. This chapter, then, is not about financial security forever. Instead, the purpose of this chapter is to offer principles and suggestions to help you complete the final step of this transformational program, to become knowledgeable and sophisticated about long-term income-producing investments so that you can manage your finances for a consistent income sufficient to your needs over the long term. Empower yourself. One of our primary missions in this book is empowerment, allowing you to take back the power that you have inadvertently given over to money. As we will see later, this includes the power you have turned over to various financial experts, to external circumstances, and to misguided financial beliefs and concepts. You have, throughout this program, been urged to become comfortable and at peace in your relationship with money, life energy. Now you're ready for the final step, learning a bit about the world of investments. Most novices, when they hear the word investment, think stocks. But as we said in Chapter 8, bonds are also investments and are quite a different animal. With stocks, your personal fortunes rise and fall with the company's fortunes. With bonds, you are loaning money, principal, to a trustworthy institution, the federal government, a municipality, a utility, a corporation, etc., at the best interest rate you can get for a set period of time, at the end of which you get your money back. All of it. So investing does not mean adopting the more is better mentality and learning how to make a killing with your capital. Having followed the steps of this program, you know how much is enough for you, and the purpose of your investment program will be to assure yourself that you will have that amount and then some for the rest of your life. Becoming knowledgeable and sophisticated means learning enough so that you can free yourself from the fear and confusion that pervade the realm of personal investments. The principles and financial strategies outlined in this chapter are sensible. They are also inexpensive to implement and do not require extensive financial management or expertise. Nothing in this section is to be construed as specific investment advice. The information here, like that in the rest of this book, is based on personal experience and is intended as guidelines, principles, and educational information. Don't just leave it to the experts. So how do you become knowledgeable and sophisticated about long-term, income-producing investments? The strategy that most newcomers to the world of investing would adopt is to go to the experts. After all, if you go to a doctor when you're sick and a mechanic when your car breaks down, it stands to reason that when you have money to invest, you go to a financial expert. Right? Not necessarily. Step 9 is about empowering yourself to make wise financial choices, and your first lesson involves educating yourself so as not to fall prey to unscrupulous brokers and salespeople who want to put you into all manner of investment vehicles that pay them handsome commissions. A securities broker is like a car salesman. In the majority of cases they work on commission and thus are eager to help you buy a product, especially one that has a high return for them. You can use them to help you when you have decided what you want to buy, but be wary of securities brokers if you're looking for investment advice. Also keep in mind that they get you coming and going. They make commissions both when you buy and when you sell, regardless if you have made a profit. However, there are independent financial consultants who work for a fee, not for commissions on products. Be sure to hire a fee-only consultant. This is the only way you can be sure that your advisor will never benefit financially from any of the specific investments she/he recommends to you. You can find a list of them at www.napfa.org. Also, try to find a consultant that supports the principles in this book. Otherwise, Your planner is likely to recommend higher risk investments that are not in alignment with the typical FIRE's investment objectives. So there you have the paradox: you and you alone are responsible for investing your money, since no one cares about the outcome more than you. But in certain circumstances, hiring a trained professional guide can be very useful. It's like the difference between changing the spark plugs or oil in your car and changing the brake pads, or even the brakes themselves. While you could spend the next year of your life learning the ins and outs of the trade, do you want to? Or do you want to pay someone you trust and who spends her life as a financial planner to advise you instead? The important thing is to become as knowledgeable as you can regarding your investment options, so that, if you choose to work with a financial planner, you will still be empowered and making your own choices. Dispelling fears like your assumptions about money and work. Your beliefs about investing have probably been pieced together from media hype, the opinions of co-workers, the advice you got from Uncle Harry, buy low, sell high, kid, randomly generated successes and failures, and sundry other unreliable sources. To pierce through these confusions and prejudices, you need only recognize that most beliefs about investing rest on two primary driving forces: greed and fear. Hopefully you've encountered and tamed your greed through applying the first 8 steps of this program. You know, through experience, that more is not necessarily better, while enough is both supremely fulfilling and achievable. Indeed, the successful pros on Wall Street have discovered the same truth, which they state as be a bull or a bear, but never a hog. The biggest fear: will I have enough tomorrow? Step 9 addresses the fear that so often underlies economic decisions. One of our biggest fears is fear of the unknown. The biggest unknown is the future. The biggest financial unknown in the future is, will I continue to have enough money over time? How do you whittle this fear down to size and transform it into appropriate prudence? 1. Through applying the investment criteria we will be suggesting. 2. Through establishing a reserve according to the guidelines we will be offering. 3. Through dispelling the irrational fear of inflation. The social disease of the 1950s was fear of depression. Back then, frugality and thrift were still our bedrock, and a penny saved is a penny earned, and waste not, want not were still mainstays of early childhood education. We enjoyed but didn't trust our newfound affluence. We can now look back on that era and see how that irrational fear of depression blinded us to what we currently celebrate as the good old days. Similarly, this generation's social disease, the morbid fear of inflation, has blinded us to some basic truths and has greatly distorted our perceptions. The financial industry has been quick to capitalize on this pervasive paranoia, with the resulting proliferation of many dubious investment vehicles. Are our fears of inflation inflated? Inflation is measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and presented as the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI is an index of the changes in prices of a fixed list of products and services when compared to the prices of those items during the reference base year. The prices are weighted according to consumer preferences, as shown in the base period's Consumer Expenditure Survey. For example, if during the reference base period the consumers surveyed bought steak twice as often as chicken, steak was given a weight of 2 and chicken a weight of 1. The CPI is not a cost of living index, no matter how often it is referred to as that. It is a list of prices for specific goods and services. It assumes that the same items are bought regularly. It does not account for the fact that you do not buy a new refrigerator every month or every year, or for the fact that today's appliance is much more energy efficient and has many more features than its predecessor, and if carefully selected can last longer. It cannot account for the fact that yesteryear's top-of-the-line model might be bested in all ways by today's economy model. The CPI does not account for changing buying habits after the base period. Prices of everyday commodities fluctuate. A freeze in Florida sends the price of orange juice skyrocketing, while simultaneously a bumper crop of apples makes the price of apple juice plummet. The financially intelligent shopper, that's you, if you've applied the smart shopping tips in Chapter 6 plus your own even more clever strategies, switches to apple juice. The CPI does not make the same rational adjustments. If you buy what is on sale and in season and you build recipes around what you have, not around what is recommended in a book written by someone with twice your income, your food cost can stay stable even when prices are going through the roof. If you buy for durability, repairability, utility, and flexibility for everything from your house to your clothes, you won't be buying these things again for a long time, maybe never, thus lowering your exposure to those items inflating in price. For example, an automobile today is a marvel of technological advances. Corrosion resistance, greater durability, reduced maintenance requirements, 60,000-mile steel-belted radial tires, a 7-year warranty, and 3 to 4 times the miles per gallon of cars of 20 years ago. How do you make a comparison? Such a car may cost 3 times more, but it may run flawlessly 5 times longer. Or maybe you've moved closer to work and walk or bike every day, eliminating the need for a car entirely. Your other FI1, financial intelligence, skills work here too. You learn to do some setup, maintenance and repair for your household and electronic devices yourself. You share some things with your friends or neighbors. You grow some of your own food and bring your lunch and even your coffee to work. You clip your cat's claws. You've stopped being taken to the cleaners by caring for wool and delicate items yourself rather than going to the cleaners for every gravy spot. Taking all this into account, might it be that at least part of our experience of inflation is due to unconscious and automatic habits as well as to our chosen lifestyle, in addition to the cost of living? In short, the CPI does not account for cultural change, technological improvements, or creative substitutions. Therefore, the CPI often suggests that the impacts of inflation are much worse than they often actually are. None of this is to say that there hasn't been real inflation, even without the distortions of the CPI. For example, the price of healthcare and health insurance has increased enormously. So have the overall costs of college and housing. In the world as it is, these items are nigh onto essential. Yes, you can live on the streets. Holy men in India do it all the time, but in the United States, homelessness is a brutal life. Yes, you can educate yourself. Joe Dominguez himself never actually graduated from college, but if you don't have a degree it can be far harder to convince an employer you're the one for the job. Yes, you can go without health insurance, but that means your nest egg, not just your health, is at risk if you get seriously ill. But while inflation may be a macroeconomic reality, this does not mean that it automatically rules your microeconomic life. Your choices, attitudes, beliefs, habits, tastes, fears, and desires can have an enormous effect on your bottom line. Consciousness can be defined as the faculty of knowing what affects your mind or what goes on in your mind. Joe always contended that consciousness grows faster than inflation, and in large part it can and does. Invest in yourself, in your own capacity to solve problems creatively, in your own inventiveness and adaptability, in your own skills and abilities, and you can at least keep hardcore inflation confined to a few areas of life, not sprawling across your whole existence. You don't need to fear inflation, you just need to manage it rationally. So here you have another paradox: you can hedge inflation more than you might think just through being conscious and making different choices, but not always and not forever. Inflation and investment returns. The ultimate return on any long-term investment is determined by 4 primary factors: the annual rate of return, fees, taxes, and the effects of inflation over time. When inflation rates are relatively low, 3% or less, returns on conservative investments like treasury bonds and certificates of deposit, CDs, will usually outpace inflation. But during times when inflation is high and you've made all the adjustments you can and still feel you need more income, you might want to consider taking more risk with your money to increase your chances of a higher return. As in fear, you don't want to risk your nest egg. But you are already putting the value of your nest egg at risk if your investment returns don't at least keep pace with inflation. How exactly do you manage your money to reduce the risks associated with inflation? Risk tolerance. Any financial professional will tell you that it's important to determine your risk tolerance before making any investments. The spectrum ranges from conservative investors who do not want to risk their capital at all to aggressive ones at the other end of the spectrum who are willing to risk all their capital for the promise of significant returns. YAAI at the conservative end are those who'd prefer to put their nest egg in the mattress or in a sealed tin buried in the garden. Make sure you make a map. Even that bears some risk. As we said earlier, inflation could eat it even if the moths or worms don't, and your money could be worth less later. YAAI at the speculative end you'll find few fears because they usually don't have the stomach for putting their hard-earned nest egg at risk in the stock market. Most fears probably fall somewhere in the middle. If you'd like to learn more about what your personal investment philosophy might be, type risk tolerance in your browser and take one of the many free tests available on the web. 3 pillars of financial independence: capital, cushion, and cash. The basic FI investment program has 3 elements: capital, the sum that is invested, ultimately producing at least as much income as indicated by the crossover point of Chapter 8. Cushion, a cash reserve that is enough to cover your expenses for 6 months. The purpose of the cushion is to handle emergencies and surges in expenses, such as annual health or auto insurance payments. Cash, pronounced cash, additional savings beyond core capital or cushion. Cash may come as a surprise to many fears. Early in your FI process, as soon as your savings have surpassed the amount you have determined to be a comfortable cushion, you can begin transferring monies into long-term investments such as those described in the following pages, thus creating your own income-producing capital. A good toe in the water toward becoming knowledgeable and sophisticated about investments is to determine what type of account to use for holding your cushion as well as the money that is accumulating, waiting to be invested. Compare the advantages of federally insured savings accounts, insured interest-paying checking accounts, money market accounts and CDs, all simple options offered by most banks or credit unions. Basic criteria for investing your capital. The guidance offered in this section is not meant to replace the research and homework you will need and want to do yourself. Rather, use this information as an overview and perhaps a starting point. It is intended to help you make smart and sensible decisions regarding your long-term investments. Since each personal financial situation is unique, the better you understand the options you have available for investing your capital, the more confidence you will have in your decisions. Joe developed for himself and suggested to others a list of investment criteria. Here is his exact list from the first edition of Your Money or Your Life. 1. Your capital must produce income. 2. Your capital must be absolutely safe. 3. Your capital must be in a totally liquid investment. You must be able to convert it into cash at a moment's notice, to handle emergencies. 4. Your capital must not be diminished at the time of investment by unnecessary commissions, loads, promotional or distribution expenses, often called 12b1 fees, management fees, or expense fees. 5. Your income must be absolutely safe. 6. Your income must not fluctuate. You must know exactly what your income will be next month, next year, and 20 years from now. 7. Your income must be payable to you, in cash, at regular intervals. It must not be accrued, deferred, automatically reinvested, etc. You want complete control. 8. Your income must not be diminished by charges, management fees, redemption fees, etc. 9. The investment must produce this regular, fixed, known income without any further involvement or expense on your part. It must not require maintenance, management, geographic presence, or attention due to acts of God. The only investments that meet all of these criteria are U.S. Treasury bonds. Joe, and you if you choose it, didn't want any of his hard-earned capital to be at risk. He simply wanted it to provide as much safe, steady income as possible. He didn't want to have to worry, at least about his own financial security, should there be a recession or a depression. U.S. Treasury bonds met his criteria and yours if you choose to. Greatest safety of capital. Greatest safety of interest. Full faith and credit of the U.S. government guarantees protection of principal and interest. Exemption from state and local taxes. Non-callability. Most Treasury bonds can't be redeemed early by the issuer. Greatest negotiability. Absolute liquidity, global marketability. They can be bought and sold almost instantly, with minimal handling charges and in convenient denominations, such as $1,000, $5,000, and $10,000. Easiest availability directly from the federal government, Treasury Direct, and through most brokers and many banks anywhere in the world. Cheapest availability, no middlemen, no commissions, no loads. Duration, the range of maturities available is extensive. You can buy a note or bond that will mature in a few months or one that won't come due for 30 years. Absolute stability of income over the long run, ideal for FI. Avoids the income fluctuations that would occur with money market funds, rental real estate, etc. Treasury bonds. Treasury bonds are the ideal investment vehicle for FIers with a low risk tolerance because they protect principal, provide a steady stream of income, and are relatively easy to understand. In addition, they are exempt from local and state taxes, can be bought and sold almost instantly with minimal handling charges, and are protected by the full faith and trust of the U.S. government. Treasury bonds are the government's way of borrowing money. A new bond is issued every few months, with maturity dates 10, 20, and 30 years into the future. The first thing that each new issue does is pay off the holders of old issues coming due. The remaining monies are used to make up the deficit in the federal budget. The national debt is the most senior obligation the government has. Principal and interest on Treasury securities must be paid when they come due, before paying for anything else. Not to do so would destroy the credit rating of the U.S. government in world markets, wreaking havoc with our ability to do business and greasing our slide into the status of a third world nation. Remember those czarist bonds. A bond is simply an IOU. The bond issuer promises to pay back to the holder of the bond the amount printed on the bond, face value, by a certain date, the maturity date. Most bonds also pay interest, at a specific percentage rate, coupon rate. This amount, though quoted as an annual percentage rate, is usually paid in 2 semi-annual installments. Bond prices fluctuate with prevailing interest rates. Therefore, if you sell a bond before maturity, you may get more or less than you paid for it, market risk. If you hold it to maturity, you will receive exactly its face value, regardless of the interest rates prevailing at that time. U.S. Treasury bonds are considered by experts to be the highest quality, safest interest-bearing investments in the world. Note, these are not the same as the old familiar Series E or EE U.S. savings bonds, or the Series HH U.S. savings bonds. Most bonds can be bought and sold at any time through banks and brokers. The website for buying Treasury bonds direct is www.treasurydirect.gov. In 1997, a new type of bond called Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, TIPS, became available for purchase. TIPS are securities issued by the U.S. Treasury whose principal is linked to the Consumer Price Index. Protection against inflation is the main reason long-term bond investors buy TIPS. They're available in 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year maturities. This protection against inflation does have a downside. TIPS has a lower rate of interest than conventional Treasury bonds. If you think that prices for food, energy, and other commodities will increase over the long term and cause higher inflation, TIPS offer you a practical hedge against inflation. If you think prices will stay flat or decrease, often referred to economically as deflation, conventional Treasury bonds would be best suited for you. Treasury bonds, when they are newly issued, can be bought directly from the Federal Reserve, with no commissions whatsoever, through a program called Treasury Direct. This cuts out the middleman, no broker, no added brokerage house fees. Cutting out the middleman by buying bonds directly is called disintermediation. It is the act of buying a given security, such as a Treasury bond, yourself rather than investing your money in an intermediary, such as a fund, bank, or other institution, that will turn around and put it into the same investments while taking a big chunk for itself. You can also buy existing Treasury bonds through a broker, for a minimal fee. The other way for an individual to buy treasuries, any issue, not just the most recent one, is through the secondary market. For various reasons, people and institutions don't always hold bonds until maturity but sell them on this secondary market. If you want a particular interest rate or maturity date, you might pay a premium. You might also pay a minimal fee or commission upon purchase. Some people prefer to buy bonds on the secondary market instead of directly from the US government because they prefer to trade with a real person who owns the bond rather than financing the US debt. If you go this route, here's some help in reading the Treasury bond table in the financial section of a major newspaper. Rate is the annual interest rate that the bond pays you, and is read as a percentage. Example: 5% means that the interest rate is 5% of the face value of the bond. Maturity or date is the maturity date, when the loan represented by the bond is repaid to you. It is also useful to know that interest is paid semi-annually on the day and month corresponding to the maturity date and 6 months later, e.g., a bond maturing in May 2030 pays you interest every May and November. Bid is the price at which a dealer offers to buy the bond, and asked is the price at which a dealer offers to sell the bond. When you buy a bond, you pay the asked price, plus a premium for buying in odd lots, under $1 million. In these tables, prices are expressed on the basis of 100. To get the actual value of a $1,000 bond, you must multiply the price by 10. Also, the bond prices in the table are expressed in points and 32 NDS of a point, e.g., a bid of 101:21 or 101 to 21 is actually 101 minus 21 30 or $1,016.56. Change is the change in the bid price, up or down, since the previous day. YLD is the yield to maturity, expressed in percent, current yield adjusted to take into consideration whether you bought it above or below PAR, the face value of the bond, and thus whether you'll have a profit or a loss when the bond is repaid. You can also buy bond funds. You can buy a bond index fund through a brokerage house as long as the expense ratio is below 0.25%. Such funds may help you garner a better interest rate, even with the slight fee. You can also get a TIPS bond fund. An additional option to consider is global bond funds, which comprise over half of the global marketplace. This option offers you an easy way to diversify your bond portfolio by adding some international exposure. In this category of bond fund investing, your choices are plentiful. www.i-shares.com, www.tiroprice.com, and www.pimco.com are all good sources to check out for more information on global bond funds. Note: citizens of countries other than the United States should investigate their own nation's government bonds. While it is possible to buy U.S. Treasury bonds almost anywhere in the world, the fluctuations in currency exchange rates make the interest income payments unpredictable, which would only be appropriate for more adventurous FI investors. Claire S. and her husband Mike G. offer a real-life story from the heartland of America about how they were able to reach financial independence primarily through Treasury bonds. The story is long, but every point they make matters. They use the term Phi-3, which has become common parlance in the global community of practitioners of this program. Recall that Phi-1 is financial intelligence, the marketplace savvy that makes your money go as far as possible. Phi-2 is financial integrity, aligning your earning and spending with your values and true fulfillment. Phi-3 is financial independence, which here is used to mean having enough income from investments to meet your needs now and in the future. Claire wrote, "When we first started the program in 1994, my husband Mike was a 40-year-old blue-collar maintenance worker in a GE plant, making median wage, which was about $35,000 at the time. He'd been in GE's 401k since he'd first been able to contribute in 1977 and had over $100,000 saved up. I had quit my job a year and a half earlier when I was 37, so we were living on his wages. While I have a PhD in chemistry and made $57,000 my last year at paid employment, my 401k savings were much less than Mike's approximately $30,000. We had no children. By the time we had been doing the program for a year, we were saving 1/3 of Mike's wages and could see that financial independence, Phi-3, was a real possibility. By 1996, we put into effect a plan to make us Phi 3 in the next several years. We paid off our mortgage, because we live in the Midwest. Cheap housing is readily available, and our house was cheap even for our area, so the amount we had to pay was under $20,000. Then we began to cash out the several different 401(k)s and annuities we had accumulated. We did this over a period of 4 to 5 years, 2 or 3 each year, to minimize the tax hit. After cashing out, we bought treasury bonds with the proceeds and reinvested the interest income into more treasuries, along with the $1,000 per month we were saving from Mike's wages. By 2001, we were making just enough interest to cover our expenses as long as we were willing to live without health insurance. One of the byproducts of working the steps was that we had become much more fearless about life, so the prospect of going without health insurance did not daunt us. Furthermore, we knew we'd each have a pension and Social Security coming when we reached the appropriate age, our inflation and illness hedge, and we figured we could get a bit of income if needed by temporary part-time work. We became Phi 3 when Mike quit his paid employment in February 2001. How have we done? Neither of us has taken a paid job to date. Our Phi 3 income remains almost all the money we make. Mike works as an election judge, for which he earns a few $100 extra in even-numbered years for a few days' work. We moved to a different house in 2002, paid for in cash, so I would have more land to garden. So far we've been able to make changes in our habits, such as growing more of our food, that have enabled us to save money faster than prices have risen. We made good use of a small inheritance we received a few years ago to do ceiling and insulation work on our house, considerably lowering our energy usage and bills. We keep finding new ways to do the things we most want to do at little to no cost. Joe was right, consciousness rises faster than inflation when you practice Phi 1 and 2. We both volunteer for organizations and causes we care about, have time to be good friends and family members, and enjoy creative outlets like music, writing, and gardening. Mike's now 54 and will receive 2 pensions at age 60, from 2 different employers, and Social Security a few years later. I'm now 51 and can draw my pension as early as age 55, with Social Security in the future. Once we can begin drawing on these sources of funds, we should be able to save a portion of the Phi 3 income and increase the Phi 3 pot as a hedge toward the future, along with continually getting better at finding non-monetary ways to meet our needs. You could say that Mike and Claire are different from you. They had a small inheritance. She had a Ph.D. They had no kids. They risked going without health insurance. But everyone's situation is unique and thus different. People without inheritances, with no advanced degrees, with several children and with some health insurance have also achieved Phi 3. They apply Phi 1 and Phi 2 as they work through the steps, and they get there. You can too. Watch out for those yes, but conversations in your head. They are the barriers to the consciousness that will let you achieve your dreams, whatever they are. Alternatives to treasury bonds. Yet consider those cases, like high inflation or big life changes, where some growth of your nest egg beyond what treasury bonds can offer would make life work better. Some early adopters of this program have been negatively impacted by rapidly rising prices for basics like healthcare, housing, food, and transportation. Consciousness helped, but further adaptation would have meant extreme measures like going without health insurance or not being able to afford living in their community. Others have a sense that their life may change in the future in ways they can't anticipate today, such as by marriage, divorce, a new career or an inner call, and want to have their nest egg grow to help them adapt to the unknown. Sure, your accumulation phase is often long enough that you've already gone through and weathered enough changes that you are pretty sure you know what the life you want costs. But more and more fears are choosing to hedge inflation with more than consciousness, cushion, and cash by supplementing bonds with different and possibly riskier income-producing investments. These other investments might not fit all of Joe's criteria above, but they are all worth considering. Since I am not the expert on investing Joe was, I asked long-term fear Mark Zafman, a fee-only financial planner, his company is www.spiritusfinancial.com, to help us understand these other options with more risk and potentially more reward. I met Mark in 2003 when he asked me to speak in Santa Rosa, California, his hometown. Mark says he and his wife Pat read Your Money or Your Life religiously every year even after achieving financial independence in 2002. That term seems to fit because when he first heard about the book on the radio in 1992, he likes to say he got religion and 10 years later became FI. In the meantime, he'd migrated from the corporate world to the FI world of being a self-employed financial planner. In Mark's own words, reaching FI in 2002 offered me a golden opportunity to give back and be of service. I began volunteering my time to the community by teaching classes and holding workshops based on the principles and strategies contained in Your Money or Your Life. Since money was the main topic of discussion, it seemed natural that many times the classes and workshops would turn into informal financial planning sessions. Unbeknownst to me at the time, these very popular financial planning sessions would form the foundation and give birth to a new business, holistic financial planning. In the fall of 2003, my wife Pat and I launched Spiritus Financial Planning, a socially responsible business based in Sonoma County, California. Tom Trimbath, whose story comes later, also contributed to this next section, reviewing and refining it. Straying from the straight and narrow into the sometimes crooked world of the stock market, investing in the stock market can be quite risky. You can strike it rich, but you can also lose your shirt. Although financial professionals often like to remind us that the stock market has a 10% average annual return, they will also acknowledge when pressed that the 10% figure is an average calculated over many decades, which means that if you're investing during the wrong 10-year period, you could lose a lot of money. In addition to the possibility of paltry returns, investors in the stock market also expose themselves to loss of principal and sometimes high fees as well. The stock market is also notoriously complicated and leaves the uninformed investor at a particular disadvantage. For these reasons, Joe never advocated investing in the stock market. However, putting your whole nest egg in treasury bonds when yields are low means a longer accumulation phase. Some fears are willing to accept a bit more risk by investing part of their nest egg in the stock market but usually want to do so as safely as possible. Mark's summary below explains the stock market options he used himself and recommends to his clients, based on their specific needs. Investment options by Mark Zafman. Mutual funds. Mutual funds are portfolios of stocks managed by professionals and frequently reflect some investment philosophy. Some have social and environmental screens, some are focused on maximum capital growth, some on diversification globally, and more. Most actively managed funds strive for larger returns by investing in specific industries, or by using specific strategies, and they typically charge more to compensate for the manager's increased workload and for the use of their skills and talents. They are not guaranteed to increase or to protect an investor's initial investment. Some fund managers limit the number of investors and will close the fund to new investors. Mutual fund investments may or may not be taxable. Mutual fund managers are constrained by regulations imposed by the Security and Exchange Commission, SEC, a federal agency. Index funds. Index funds are mutual funds designed to mimic the performance of stock market indices such as the Dow Industrials, the Nasdaq Composite and the S&P 500. As an FI investor, you have learned when enough is enough, particularly in terms of your money. In using index funds to invest your capital, you are not attempting to beat the market. Instead, you are looking for enough of a return to meet your short-term as well as long-term goals while taking as little risk as possible. That is why index funds, with their low fees and ability for diversification, can work well for the FI investment program. At its core, index fund investing means you are using an approach and strategy that seeks to track the investment returns of a specified stock or bond market benchmark or index. One of the most popular index funds today is the S&P 500 Index Fund, which attempts to replicate the investment results of this specific target index. There is no attempt to use traditional active money management or to make bets on individual stocks. Indexing is a passive investment approach emphasizing broad diversification and low portfolio trading activity. Low cost is a key advantage of index funds, leaving a larger share of the pie for investors, which is why this choice aligns well for your FI investment plan. Low fees are key. Fees, by far, are one of the most overlooked areas in terms of investment decisions. Index funds boast some of the lowest portfolio management fees in the industry, which is why they are the vehicle of choice for investors looking for value as well as performance. For example, a leading S&P 500 index fund expense ratio was 0.15% as of August 2008, compared to the average large growth actively managed mutual fund with an expense ratio of 1.18%. Multiply the difference in expenses over 10, 20, or 30 years and you can quickly see why low fees make a big difference to your investment return over time. Being FI means we know down to the penny the flow of money that comes into and out of our lives, which means that fees, especially low fees, matter to us. By using low-fee index funds as part of your core FI portfolio, you're applying FI thinking at its best. No-load funds. With all of the investment choices available today, it's getting harder and harder to justify paying loads, also known as commissions or sales fees, when purchasing mutual funds. The exception here is that when you are saving for FI3, it may be the only option available through your employer's retirement plan. In this case, your 401k, 403b, or IRA may be linked to an investment firm that charges loads on their investment options. If that's the case for you, you may have to accept it and choose wisely, knowing that even with the sales fee you're paying, investing your money tax deferred is better than not investing at all. Post FI3, you can carefully rearrange your investments, avoiding as much as possible fees for early withdrawal. When you have a choice about where to invest your money, though, choose firms that offer no load funds, carry no sales fees, loads, and don't charge 12b1 fees to cover marketing expenses. Actively managed funds or index funds. If you can't figure out which to choose, an actively managed mutual fund or an index fund, no worries. The sharpest minds in the industry seem to favor index funds for people like us. A few examples: legendary investor Warren Buffett. Most investors are better off putting their money in low-cost index funds. A very low-cost index is going to beat a majority of the professionally managed money. Best-selling author Larry Swedroe, from his book, What Wall Street Doesn't Want You to Know, regardless of the asset class, see below, use only index or passive asset class funds. Active management is a loser's game. Diversify across many asset classes. This will reduce portfolio risk and probably increase returns as well. Designing your own enough. And then some FI3 portfolio. Your portfolio is a fancy way of saying the sum of your investments across asset classes, which simply means types of investment vehicles such as cash, bonds, stocks, real estate, foreign currency, and commodities. Asset allocation is the art and science of distributing your nest egg across various classes to balance risk and reward. Instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you are wisely limiting your market risk by spreading your money across various asset classes. This is a smart, sensible, and time-tested strategy. By using index funds, you can allocate your capital across various asset classes. This enables you to reduce volatility without giving up investment performance. Beyond index funds, the simplest kind of mutual fund, lifestyle funds. The FI investment program was designed to be easy to implement as well as simple to manage. If, in addition to index funds, you were to choose only one new investment strategy that could mirror this approach, it would have to be investing in mutual funds known as lifestyle funds. This all-in-one concept seems uniquely designed for an FI investment plan because the management fees are low, the plan is simple to manage, and it enables inexperienced investors to quickly establish a well-diversified portfolio that reduces market risk. The beauty of lifestyle funds is that with the purchase of one mutual fund you end up owning 5 funds spread across a variety of asset classes. For example, a lifestyle fund might divide its holdings among the U.S. stock market, the U.S. bond market, the international stock index and a variety of other options. This approach takes the guesswork out of where and how to invest your capital, which is often the reason many people avoid the stock market in the first place. For those who plan on sticking with the FI investment program yet are willing to take some risk with a portion of their capital, this would be a very viable option. These funds enable you to pick the asset allocation that fits your long-term investment objective. Best of all, the fund automatically rebalances to maintain a consistent allocation among stocks, bonds, and short-term investments. Puzzling through these options, through the risks and rewards of different paths, Sally H. decided to split her investment portfolio using the enough and then some description of the nest egg you have at crossover. She invests the bulk of her money in treasury bonds so she knows that no matter what the world throws her way, she has enough income to cover her basics. But the and then some is her cash, which she invests in mutual and index funds much like the strategies above. More risk, but potentially more reward and more cash. Should she lose it all, she's still fine, and she can slowly over time build her cash back up. Mark Zafman told me that in his own practice, personal and professional, he uses Vanguard, a company that is known for simplicity and low fees. There are other mutual funds, some with socially responsible screens, that may be important to you. Trying to speak to those fears who want to keep it simple, he offered the 4 Vanguard funds to narrow the field of thousands of mutual funds down to something manageable. Here's his explanation: Mark's suggestions for your new FI investment strategy. The most conservative approach for this strategy would be to use the Life Strategy Income Fund, the first of the 4 Vanguard funds. Although marketed as a fund for those in retirement, it is also applicable for those who are FI and no longer working for money. This fund seeks current income and has some growth of capital. The fund applies a fixed formula that over time should reflect an asset allocation of approximately 60% of the fund's assets to bonds, 20% to short-term reserves, and 20% to common stocks. A balanced approach would be to use the Life Strategy Conservative Growth Fund. This balanced approach literally balances your need for long-term growth of capital along with your need for income. The fund is allocated approximately as follows: 40% of the fund's assets to bonds, 20% to short-term fixed income reserves, and 40% to common stocks. This choice would be well suited for investors at all stages of their journey to FI. An additional balanced approach would be to use the Life Strategy Moderate Growth Fund. This fund offers a higher allocation to stocks, which means more potential for growth. The fund is allocated approximately as follows: 60% of the fund's assets to common stocks and 40% to bonds. However, this might be more nest egg risk and less month-to-month income than you want. Likewise for the Life Strategy Growth Fund, a fourth option, which will likely appeal only to those who want to invest during their nest egg accumulation phase. The objective of this fund is to seek long-term growth of capital with some income, which may be a goal for younger FIers who have a longer time horizon and are willing to tolerate more risk in their portfolio to be sure their enough and then some is still there for them decades into the future. The fund is allocated approximately as follows: 80% to common stocks and 20% to bonds. Step 4. For Step 9, an increasing number of FIers are getting on the socially responsible investing SRI bandwagon because such investment vehicles allow them to merge their quest for financial independence with their humanitarian or environmental values. SRI has grown as a field from 55 socially screened mutual funds with $12 billion in assets in 2005 to 260 funds with $202 billion in assets in 2007. Brent Kessel, co-founder of Abacus Portfolios and author of It's Not About the Money, says of this approach to investing, while SRI was originally considered a fringe movement of tree-hugging Californians, the downfall of such corporate giants as Enron, Tyco, and Arthur Andersen brought a whole new population of SRI investors in from both sides of the political aisle. Vanguard, the family of funds Mark uses with clients, also has an SRI fund, the Vanguard FTSE. Calvert, Ariel, and Domini funds have been around longer, but now, with the popularity of SRI, most mutual funds will offer some screened funds. For those who want to go this route, several fears recommend the website of the Social Investment Forum, www.socialinvest.org, which offers comprehensive contacts, resources, and information on socially responsible investing and is a good source of information about trends in the field and how these vehicles compare to the conventional market. Fears beware, however. Expressing your environmental and social justice values, being good, doesn't guarantee that you'll maximize your income, doing well. Do your research. In general, funds with lower costs, more diversification, and screening that matches your values will be your best bets. Your Step 4 questions about fulfillment and alignment can help here too. Some folks sleep better with their money in socially screened investments, others sleep better with their money making the most it possibly can. Checklist of things to consider when investing. 1. Is this investment in line with my values? 2. What are the federal, state and local tax implications of this investment for me? Is it tax efficient for my income bracket or situation? 3. How easily can I liquidate, sell out of, all or part of this investment? 4. What sales charges/penalties, if any, will I incur in getting into or out of this investment? 5. Does this provide the current/future income one need? 6. Does this provide overall diversification for my investments? 7. Is this investment in line with my tolerance for risk? What about other investments? Real estate. I, Vicki, ended up owning a large house in Seattle after all my prior housemates and co-owners flew the coop. I bought them out one by one, paying them a fair return on their initial investment. I shifted some money from bonds to this property because at some money in the mattress, gut level way I trust an investment that can also be a roof over my head. We bought right before the real estate boom in Seattle, and the house now turns out to be through no forethought of my own worth several times what we originally paid. I still consider it my primary residence, but much of the year I'm off somewhere else while my current housemates pay rent and tend to maintenance. Charging below market rates ensures that I get an excellent return on my investment combined with the pleasure of knowing others are flourishing within those four walls. Steve S. did his own version of this by purchasing a self-storage facility and having on-site and off-site managers run the project on a daily basis. Yes, of course, this is in part profiting from consumer excess having more stuff than house to put it in. Whatever the irony, Steve and his family collect enough per month that he's been able to live and save enough to buy a second facility. He's chosen a life of community service, occupying roles of significant responsibility, but he is able to be bold in his service because he has that passive income that actively supports his life. Quinton N. and his wife Irene have a real estate story with some real ups and downs. They bought a fourplex 20 years ago, living in one unit and renting the other 3. Even when they moved to a nearby city, they kept the fourplex as an income property. All well and good until the neighborhood around them deteriorated and their building deteriorated as well. Far from distant, uncaring landlords, they traveled 50 miles to their rental property every time something needed tending, and they also tolerated late payments and low rents from long-time tenants when they skidded into hard times. But when those tenants left and they inspected the place, they were faced with thousands of dollars of repairs. The coffers are filling again, but their story reminds us of the downside of this strategy for fears. Property values can go down, and property upkeep can go up just when you plan to go south for the winter. Community. Even though this is a book about money, it is more essentially a book about how consciousness plus frugality strategies can offer much of the security we look to money to provide. Money is not the only form of security. Security can also look like what Dave Wampler has. He's the founder of a great website on simpler living, and he has chosen to invest in his community. He has no family and currently no partner, but he does have what he calls the most wonderful friends in the world who will never let one another down. On almost any given day someone who has done him a favor is over for a meal, and many evenings you can find 5 or 6 of his neighbors on his porch. When any one of them needs help, someone is there to stack wood or tend a baby. His town is split between what he calls rednecks and hippy dippies, but everyone is there for one another. His income is enough to meet his basic needs, but his deep security comes from living in a tight-knit community. Another way to invest in community is to consider loaning money to friends at an interest rate that's better for you than bonds but lower for them than a bank. I have done this repeatedly with deeply satisfying results. These friends aren't, as they say on cop shows, a flight risk since they are part of my community. We arrange a monthly automatic transfer of capital plus interest for the term of the loan so that our daily interactions have nothing to do with money. I have another community member co-sign the loan as added protection. Yes, it's emotionally as well as financially risky. They could come on hard times and not be able to pay, just like when you loan money to a relative. Linking my fortunes with the well-being of those I hope will flourish satisfies that other asset class, love. I first did this in 1987 when a group of my New Roadmap Foundation partners and I wanted to buy that large house in Seattle I mentioned earlier. We wanted a home for ourselves and offices for our nonprofit organization. None of us had the money or the credit history to buy the house, but a strategy emerged that allowed us church mice to own the church. We went to the bank explaining that we had no debt and our income was based, collectively, on an astounding $500,000 in capital that would secure the mortgage. A mortgage for 1/3 of the cost was approved. Another third came from one member selling her other house. Where to get the final third, though? Then we realized that we could each liquidate a few of our finest egg bonds and lend the money to the community at an equal rate of interest. BYOB could mean be your own banker. We became the bankers and paid those with house bonds interest semi-annually. Another version of this, of course, is investing in a local business rather than making a loan. Some prefer to share risks and rewards with their friends rather than loan them money. Cushions make for smoother landings. Whatever level your monthly expenses settle in at, you will want 6 times that amount readily available in a bank account or money market fund. You are not financially independent until you have a cushion to handle spikes in expenses. Besides smoothing out the flow of money into and out of your life, however, your cushion has another important function. If you have concern about your consciousness growing faster than inflation, a cushion eases those doubts. Rosemary I found herself getting increasingly uneasy as her projected crossover point approached. She was used to her job, and the thought of turning off that trusty faucet and depending on bond income alone was scary. Rationally she knew her bond income was enough and then some, but she still had irrational fears of not being able to re-enter the job market if FI somehow didn't work. Maybe this is what trapeze artists feel when they are assessing when to let go of their bar so they can swing over to the other one, she thought. Her safety net, cushion, was in place, but it felt very far away. What she decided to do was to bring the net closer and beef it up by doubling her cushion. With those extra thousands in the bank, she found it easy to face down the inner worrywart who kept asking, but what if you total your car and have a major illness and your house burns down all in the same year? As Carl M. approached FI he, like Rosemary, found himself reluctant to turn off the flow of job income that had filled his coffers for over 12 years. He jokes that there is a 10th step to this program: remembering to quit your job. He came to realize that because he had devoted the majority of his time and intellect to being a computer programmer, he had depended on money to buy his way out of many of life's difficulties. His what-ifs had to do with maintaining his house and car without enough money to pay a small army of mechanics, plumbers, roofers, and exterminators. He handled his fear by deciding to become knowledgeable and sophisticated about home and auto maintenance, apprenticing to some experts and reading everything the library had to offer. Turning a what if into a why not is the epitome of FI thinking. Ted and Martha P. developed a different strategy for the what ifs. This was especially important for them because their son and their FI came along at about the same time. While they had no intention that their son would be one of those $200,000 average American kids, they knew they'd have plenty of financial surprises during the 18 years of full-time parenting. So they made what they call a life chart for all 3 of them. For each year from now until they will be 85, they asked themselves, what needs or desires might come up. They included all the normal expenses of raising a healthy, but not pampered, child things like braces, tutoring, summer camp and his first car and determined how much each might cost. They then bought an investment vehicle called zero coupon bonds, treasury bonds with no interest, bought at a big discount but repaid at par and especially good for future cash needs, with different bonds coming due in each of the years that their son might need a big ticket item. And if he doesn't need braces or want to go to summer camp, they'll just roll over the money into regular treasury bonds. They also anticipated their own reasonable needs, including housing, healthcare, education, and travel, and calculated how the combination of their cushion and their cash could handle them with ease. They've even handled the what if it doesn't work fear with the reminder that they could go back to work for a finite period of time to handle a completely unanticipated change in lifestyle. Having thought through the what ifs and having already allocated funds to handle them, they can breathe easy in the present. Not only that, but they've projected a happy and fulfilling life for all three of them, a life in which even the normal bumps and bruises are taken in stride and are part of the adventure. They have already embraced the future and eliminated the fear and mystery that so often keep others with their noses to the grindstone. Alan Side and Trisha King were some of the earliest FI adopters. Alan encountered Joe's recorded seminar in college and knew with a capital K that he too wanted to be FI by the time he was 30. His sweetheart, Trisha King, came to share that goal. Being bilingual, Alan's maximizing your income skill discussed in Chapter 7 was as a translator and interpreter. Trisha earned her FI income as a massage therapist. By the time they were married, they'd each accumulated a nest egg sufficient to be FI for their current lifestyle. But they had a dream of a rural learning and living center for sustainability, and when the perfect piece of land became available they realized that Trisha's nest egg, plus some help from parents, could purchase it outright while Alan's FI income could cover basics with a little bit of work on the side. With a secure relationship and home, they decided to have a child, something that wasn't in the cards half a decade before. And then another. With 2 children to support, they could no longer live on their FI 3 income. They formed a mediation and training company and started renting out unused buildings on their land. They are committed to their whole family becoming FI and they are still doing all the steps. They call it their second FI. Their first FI allowed them to train in skills they considered essential for transformational change: permaculture, nonviolent communication, integral philosophy, and the FI program itself, skills they now use in their practice. Together they consider these the crucial curriculum for change agents and frequently teach one or more of these modules to individuals, agencies, and institutions in their areas. Had they not worked diligently towards their first FI, Alan would still be a translator and interpreter and Trisha would still be doing massages and both would be living in rental houses in the city. Their second FI, however long it takes to get there, will free them to develop a coho-using community on their land, making it a model of sustainability. This pattern is becoming more common of people who became FI in one circumstance going back to work with their first FI as a base. Their second climb up the FI mountain is much easier. They already know how to do it and that it works. Also, the amount of money required is far less than the first time around. Rosemary I recently wrote from her new home back east where she's moved to be close to her aging parents. Even though my FI income is no longer enough for all of my expenses, I can certainly attest to the feeling of relief and freedom that comes from having some interest income and also the satisfaction of not having my assets waver and plummet with the stock market. I still feel comfortable defending my choice to invest in treasury bonds. Your cushion will be there to handle the what-if worries, either by proving them unfounded or by providing the cash needed to see you through. And then there's your cash, which will continue to enlarge your cushion and even increase the amount of capital you have to invest. What is cash and where does it come from? In pioneer days, a cache was a hole in the ground where travelers buried provisions for later use that were too heavy to carry. In your FI program, your cache is a store of extra money, beyond your capital or your cushion, that builds up for future use. Funds feeding the cash account come from numerous sources. One, in step 4 you ask the question, how might this expenditure change if I didn't have to work for a living? Most people who choose full financial independence find that their expenses go down significantly when they leave paid employment. No more commuting expenses, no more dress for success expenses, no more restaurant lunch expenses, and many more such reductions. So since the crossover point is based on your total expenses while you are engaged in paid employment, the excess investment income will begin to pile up after you are financially independent. This is the and then some we referred to in the definition of FI as having enough and then some. 2. Continuing to do the steps after FI is a natural pattern. Your experience of financial integrity and financial intelligence is now so ingrained and so fulfilling that you don't want to stop. As a matter of fact, there may be an even higher level of zeal since, thanks to becoming FI, you know that these principles work. So between the ingrained patterns of consciousness, the intellectual appreciation of the obvious logic of the steps, and the experiential awareness of how much more fulfilling your life is when lived at enough, you may find that you are still spending less. Yet your income continues to march on at the same level, creating more cash. 3. As time goes on, you notice the wisdom of your choices back in step 6. Your carefully researched purchases are not breaking down. Your ability to maintain your material possessions has increased enormously, and you don't need to replace them anywhere near as often as you used to. You are also not enticed by the newest new and improved upgrade. Your material universe is in place. Yet the original cost of those purchases had inflated your monthly expenses before you reached your crossover point. You discover that you are spending less than your monthly income. More cash. 4. Your total monthly expenses included federal, state and local income taxes, based on a sizable income that included a very large amount going into your FI investments. After FI, your total monthly income is just above your total monthly expenses. Now your tax bill has dropped considerably. More cash. 5. Another source of cash is incidental income. This might be anything from an unexpected inheritance to notification by the IRS of an error in a 2-year-old tax return that results in a refund. 6. Cash can also be supplemented by paid employment. Some FIers find that their new life directions require short-term paid employment in order to complete the mastery of new skills. Others find that putting extra income into their cash provides an added measure of security as well as giving them a little extra money to finance new dreams. This is what Mike G does as an election worker, or what Irene G, Quinton's wife, does as a nurse midwife who subs from time to time to keep her hands in her profession, so to speak. Marcia M uses her income from occasional temporary jobs to build up her cash so she can travel whenever she wants to, as she did recently when a family member 2,000 miles away became ill. How to spend cash: the money that accumulates in your post-FI cash fund, money that by definition you do not need for your everyday living expenses, has an important role to play in your overall FI investment plan. Since by getting FI you have already broken the link between income and lifestyle choices, i.e., having money does not lead you into spending more, this cash fund is not a source of temptation. The initial function of the cash may be psychological. It proves to you that you do have enough and then some over time, helping to quell any lingering what-ifs. On the outside chance that inflation in one or another of your spending categories gets ahead of your ever-increasing skill and consciousness in clever use of resources, your cash fund handles the shortfall. It is from this fund that you can replace major items necessary to your chosen lifestyle when they finally do wear out, things like a car, a bicycle, or crowns for your back teeth. Since there are many ways you can replenish your cash for the next unexpected expense, you don't need to worry. Your cash is a living resource, not a one-time bundle that you will deplete. Projects and causes that you participate in may need an infusion of capital to achieve a specific objective. You can provide that capital without damaging your ability to provide that most valuable of contributions, your undivided life energy. 2 final stories about FIers who chose to invest directly in individual stocks. Tom Trimbath, author of Dream, Invest, Live, made his money the conventional way. As an aerospace engineer, he was able to sock away a lot of money in a fairly short time, so he and his wife, also working, could be FI. Once there, Tom loved it, but his wife found she yearned for a more traditional life. They split up, a fate that even this program can't anticipate. Suddenly Tom's FI income almost halved, while his house payments doubled. Like other fears who've had radical changes in their domestic situation, he made many frugality adjustments. Unwilling to shrink his life, Tom, having an analytical mind and an adventurous spirit, decided to recreate his and then some through investing. Some people don't wait until they are FI to go this route, and it's not for everyone. Most fears don't have the stomach for it. But Tom is also a hiker, climber, and long-distance bicyclist. He's biked across the country, he's used to challenges. Freed from many money fears from what he learned reading Oil, and inspired by Peter Lynch, who advises investors to buy companies they understand, Tom has chosen to invest in small startups, with a particular interest in new technology companies. Some days are better than others. Tom is in fear in his inventiveness and capacity to sniff out bargains. But he is not an FI investor according to Joe's definition. What makes this all okay? He couldn't do it if he hadn't learned from Oil to be frugal with his time and his money and to no longer be intimidated by the financial fears that plague most people. He's learned to live comfortably on the cheap, knows he can go back to work if he must, and has the patience, risk tolerance, and confidence that his investments will maintain his lifestyle. In the meantime, he is free to chase his dreams and write books about America, nature, and personal finance. Kevin Cornwell and his wife Catherine Dovey crossed over 13 years ago in 1995 with $400,000 in assets. They had, on and off, up to 3 rental properties, leveraging the value of their house. They also rented out part of their main residence in a mother-in-law apartment arrangement. Beyond their stable real estate investments and income, they made a hobby with their and then some money of investing in individual companies as well as mutual funds. To become knowledgeable and sophisticated about equity investments, they educated themselves through NAIC, National Association of Investors Corporation, and helped found several different investment clubs over the years. Not surprising they'd used the 5 steps to get where they wanted to go on one leg of the journey and now use this other set of tools for more cash. These are the principles they follow: 1. Invest a set amount regularly. 2. Reinvest earnings, dividends, and profits. 3. Invest in quality growth stocks and equity mutual funds. 4. Diversify your investments. Kevin said, joining an investment club was a safe and fun way to educate ourselves about investing in individual stocks. The point of investment clubs is learning about investments, not getting rich. We took the insights and knowledge gained at club meetings and applied them to our own investments. The next profit area was plugging the drain to their nest egg caused by taxes. So, to become knowledgeable and sophisticated, they took a standard class for tax preparers. Keeping more of their income meant having more cash. Having learned the ins and outs of the tax code, Kevin notes that more than half of our investments are in tax-deferred vehicles, IRAs, 401(k), etc., as a way to keep more of what we earn and have earned. To that end, we keep a spreadsheet that forecasts our cash flow through the next 10 years or more, and that's when we can access the tax-deferred accounts without penalty. And, if hard times were to hit before then, we still have access to our money if we're willing to accept the penalties. Their final cash stream is pure your money or your life. They always live below their means. The upshot, they've tripled their nest egg. Kevin has worked on volunteer projects that have sometimes produced income, and Kath has chosen to work part-time at a job she enjoys, doing it not so much for money as for love. Each of you will construct an FI portfolio that matches your ways of thinking, your ways of living, your tolerance for risk, and your creativity in applying consciousness rather than money to meeting your needs. It's truly up to you. In conclusion, you are well on your way to taking back the power you have given over to money and to money experts. You are ready to become a conscientious, loving, and knowledgeable steward of your life energy. Our greatest hope is that you will apply these steps to your own finances and apply your life energy to the challenges that face our species and our planet. We wish you great success. Summary of Step 9: Become knowledgeable and sophisticated about long-term income-producing investments and manage your finances for a consistent income sufficient to your needs over the long term.